Get ready for a haunting journey through 6 theme park accidents that changed lives forever. From roller coasters that should never have failed, to rides where safety systems were deliberately ignored, these stories will stay with you long after you've heard them. Some were caught on camera. Others left survivors with scars that will never fade. Each one reveals how quickly joy can turn to tragedy, and how the pursuit of thrills sometimes comes at the highest cost imaginable. Because at theme parks around the world, beneath the music and the laughter, these 6 accidents left shadows that refuse to disappear. June 2nd, 2015. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon at Alton Towers, one of the United Kingdom's most celebrated theme parks. The kind of early summer day families wait for all year. Among the crowds streaming through the park's Gothic gates were 18-year-old Leah Washington and her boyfriend, 19-year-old Joe Pugh. They'd made the 2-hour drive from South Yorkshire, giddy with excitement about riding the Smiler, a steel roller coaster known for holding the world record with 14 inversions. More loops and corkscrews than any ride on Earth. For Leah, it was her first time at Alton Towers. For Joe, it was a chance to show her the park he'd visited since childhood. The Smiler's queue wound through dark corridors covered in hypnotic patterns and unsettling imagery. "Join us," the speakers whispered. "It's fun to do bad things." The ride's theme was psychological manipulation, a tongue-in-cheek celebration of mind control. As Leah and Joe climbed into row 4, seat 3 and 4, they had no idea how dark the theme was about to become. The Smiler had been operating since May 2013, just over 2 years before this day. It was Alton Towers' flagship attraction, an 18 million British pound investment in twisted steel and G-forces. The ride featured a vertical lift hill, 4 inversions in the first half, a second lift, then 10 more inversions before slamming into the brake run. Riders experienced forces that flipped them upside down again and again, their worlds spinning until they could barely remember which way was up. That afternoon, engineers had noticed a fault. One of the trains, an empty test vehicle, had stopped on the track near the first lift hill. The ride's computerized safety system, designed to prevent collisions, automatically shut down all 5 trains. Standard procedure would be to manually inspect the stopped train, confirm the track was clear, and only then restart operations. But the queue was long, the sun was out, and management wanted the ride running. At 1:58 p.m., a ride operator made a decision. He overrode the computer system, manually resetting the safety blocks that were designed to keep trains separated. The stopped test train remained on the track. The operator didn't see it from his station, or perhaps he assumed it had cleared. Either way, at 2 p.m., he pressed the dispatch button and sent a fully loaded train carrying 16 passengers, including Leah and Joe, hurtling up the lift hill. At 2:09 p.m., the unthinkable. The loaded train crested the lift and plunged down the first drop, accelerating to nearly 53 miles per hour. As it banked through the first series of inversions and rounded a tight turn, riders in the front row saw it. Another train, dead ahead, still, stopped on the track. There was no time to scream. The impact was catastrophic. The front car of the moving train collided with the rear car of the stationary one at nearly full speed. The sound, witnesses said, was like a freight train derailing. Metal screeched, fiberglass shattered. The force threw riders forward against their restraints with brutal, bone-shattering violence. Leah and Joe, seated in row 4, took the full brunt of the collision. Their legs were crushed between the seats in front of them and the twisted wreckage of the train itself. When the ride finally powered down and emergency crews arrived, the scene was beyond comprehension. 4 passengers, all seated in the front rows, had sustained life-changing injuries. Leah's left leg was mangled beyond recognition. Joe's knees were shattered. The others suffered fractures, lacerations, internal injuries. Witnesses described a strange, eerie silence after the impact. Then, the screaming started. Not from thrill, from agony. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but extracting the injured riders took hours. The train was wedged into the track at a steep angle, 20 feet above the ground. Firefighters used cutting equipment to free passengers one by one. Leah remained conscious throughout, trapped in her seat, staring down at what was left of her leg. "I just remember looking down," she later told reporters, "and seeing that it wasn't there anymore." By the time she was airlifted to Royal Stoke University Hospital, surgeons had made their decision. Her left leg had to be amputated above the knee. Joe underwent emergency surgery to save both his knees, enduring multiple procedures to repair shattered bones and torn ligaments. 2 other riders suffered severe injuries, including a punctured lung and fractured limbs. The park closed the Smiler immediately. Then, in an act that stunned many, Alton Towers closed its gates entirely for the first time in its history. The investigation that followed would expose a culture of complacency, ignored warnings, and a catastrophic failure of human judgment. The UK Health and Safety Executive conducted a months-long investigation. Their findings were damning. The crash was entirely preventable. Engineers had identified the stopped train. The computer system had worked exactly as designed, automatically halting operations to prevent a collision. But the ride operator, under pressure to keep the queue moving, had manually overridden 6 separate safety systems. He told investigators he thought the computer was malfunctioning. He assumed the track was clear. He never visually confirmed. In April 2016, Merlin Entertainments, the company that owns Alton Towers, pleaded guilty to breaching the Health and Safety at Work Act. They were fined £5 million, one of the largest penalties ever imposed on a UK theme park. The judge described the incident as a catastrophic failure caused by a litany of errors. For Leah and Joe, the legal victory meant little. Leah spent years learning to walk again with a prosthetic leg. She became a public advocate for disability rights, her story shared across UK media. Joe underwent 17 surgeries over the following 3 years. In 2019, they received an undisclosed settlement rumored to be in the millions. The Smiler reopened in 2016, just 9 months after the crash. For some, it was too soon. For Leah, it was a reminder that the ride that took her leg was still spinning, still flipping riders upside down, still whispering, "Join us." From a ride deliberately restarted to something far more insidious. Halfway across the world in Australia, another ride was about to claim not 1 life, but 4. And the warnings had been there for years. October 25th, 2016, Dreamworld, Australia's Gold Coast. Thunder River Rapids had been a family favorite for 30 years, a gentle water raft ride through caves and waterfalls. That Tuesday morning, Kate Goodchild, 32, brought her 2 children and her brother Luke Dorset, 35. In the raft ahead, Rusbeh Aragi, 38, and his partner, Cindy Lowe, 42, settled in for what should have been a peaceful 3-minute float. For weeks, one of the ride's water pumps had been turned off as a cost-saving measure. Management knew. Engineers had warned that reduced water flow could cause rafts to collide. At 2:04 p.m., Kate and Luke's raft entered the final section and hit the conveyor belt that would lift them to the unload station. Without enough water, the raft became wedged. The conveyor kept running. The raft behind them, carrying Kate's 2 children, slammed forward. The first raft flipped vertically. Kate, Luke, Roosbay, and Cindy were thrown into the conveyor machinery. 2 were crushed instantly. The others were dragged into the mechanical system. Kate's children watched it happen. 10 and 12 years old, screaming as their mother and uncle were pulled under. 4 adults dead in seconds. The investigation found a pattern of negligence so extensive it shocked Australia. Engineers had reported near misses before. The emergency stop was positioned where operators couldn't reach it quickly. Cost-cutting had turned a gentle family ride into a death trap. Dreamworld's parent company was fined 3.6 million Australian dollars, the largest workplace safety penalty in Australian history. The coroner's conclusion was brutal, completely avoidable, the result of systemic failure. Thunder River Rapids was dismantled in 2018, but for Kate's children, now adults, the image of that Tuesday morning never fades. The ride that was supposed to be the safest took the people they loved most. From Australia to Japan, where a roller coaster's speed would hide a danger no one could see until bodies started breaking. December 2020. At the base of Mount Fuji, Japan's Fuji-Q Highland housed Do-Do-Donpa, a launch coaster that promised the impossible. 0 to 180 kilometers per hour in 1.56 seconds, faster than a fighter jet catapult. A woman in her 40s from Tokyo bought her ticket, unaware she was about to become the ride's first casualty. Do-Do-Donpa had opened in 2017 with an aggressive compressed air launch that pinned riders back with crushing force. Medical professionals later said the G-forces bordered on the limits of human spinal tolerance. The park insisted it was safe. Thousands had ridden without issue. At 1:15 p.m., the woman boarded. The countdown began. The compressed air system fired. Her spine compressed violently. Deep in her neck, between the 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae, something cracked. She felt searing pain shoot down her back. By the time the train hit the brakes, she could barely move. Days later, doctors confirmed the diagnosis: cervical spine compression fracture, the kind of injury from car crashes, not amusement rides. Then another report came in. A man in his 50s, August 2021, same injury. Then another. By mid-2021, Japanese media discovered at least 6 riders had suffered identical fractures, all between December 2020 and August 2021, all from Do-Do-Donpa. The world's fastest accelerating coaster was breaking spines. Japan's Ministry of Transport investigated. Engineers found the launch produced sudden spinal compression identical to rear-end collisions. The ride had been designed at the edge of human tolerance. For some riders, it crossed the line. In March 2024, Fuji-Q Highland announced Do-Do-Donpa would never reopen. There's no way to eliminate the risks of injury, the park admitted. The ride was dismantled. For the injured riders left with chronic pain and shattered vertebrae, the closure meant nothing. They'd already paid the price for trusting a machine that moved faster than human bodies could safely endure. From a ride that moved too fast to one that should have been the safest ever built. Because in Orlando, at a brand new billion-dollar theme park, something went catastrophically wrong. March 24th, 2022. International Drive, Orlando. Icon Park's Orlando Freefall stood 430 feet tall, advertising itself as the world's tallest freestanding drop tower. Tyree Sampson, a 14-year-old from Missouri, was on spring break with his football team. At 6 feet 5 inches and 370 pounds, he was a gentle giant with a future in athletics. That Thursday evening, he climbed into Seat 1, excited for the thrill. The ride had opened just 4 months earlier. Each seat had an over-the-shoulder harness designed to lock at various positions depending on rider size. But Tyree was too big. The harness didn't close fully. A ride operator pushed on it, checked the sensor. Green light. He let Tyree ride. Investigators would later discover that restraint had been manually adjusted, loosened to allow larger guests to board. The ride was never designed for someone Tyree's size, but the park wanted revenue. At 11 p.m., Orlando Freefall ascended to 430 feet, then dropped. As G-forces pulled upward, Tyree began slipping. His teammates heard him shout, "I'm falling!" At 250 feet above the ground, he slipped free of the loosened restraint entirely. Tyree Sampson fell from the ride at over 70 miles per hour and struck the ground below. The sound echoed across the park. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His teammates, who'd been laughing with him seconds earlier, stood frozen in shock. The investigation found the harness sensor had been deliberately modified, doubling the safety gap. In December 2024, a jury awarded Tyree's family $310 million, one of the largest verdicts in theme park history. Orlando Freefall was dismantled in 2023. A memorial plaque now marks where it stood. For Tyree's mother, no verdict could bring back her son. For his teammates who watched him fall, the memory is inescapable. Tyree Sampson went to Icon Park to have fun. He trusted the machines, and he never made it home. From Florida to Sweden, where a 35-year-old roller coaster would fail because of a part that should never have been installed. June 25, 2023. Stockholm's Gröna Lund, Sweden's oldest amusement park. Jetline had been carrying guests safely since 1988, a local favorite that parents who'd ridden it as children now brought their own kids to experience. That Sunday, a woman in her 30s boarded with friends, expecting nostalgia and adrenaline. She got horror instead. Deep inside Jetline's train, a support arm was failing. The part had been manufactured by a subcontractor in 2018, cutting costs and rushing production. The welds were weak. A key internal support beam was missing entirely. For 5 years, the defective arm held, until 1:15 p.m. on June 25th, when it finally snapped. 1/3 through the ride, the wheel assembly detached and fell to the ground. The train's undercarriage scraped the track, lurched sideways. 3 passengers in the front rows were thrown from the train. One woman was killed instantly when her body struck the ride's structure. The other 2 fell over 30 feet, surviving, but with life-changing injuries. The remaining passengers stayed strapped in the derailed train, suspended at an angle, the track beneath them torn apart. The Swedish Accident Investigation Authority's report was damning. The support arm had multiple manufacturing defects. The subcontractor had no proper credentials. The welds reduced the metal strength by over 30%. Gröna Lund hadn't known about the cost-cutting substitution. In June 2024, CEO Jan Eriksson announced Jetline would close forever. Out of respect for the accident and everyone involved, he said, "We have decided to close Jetline for good." A ride that had operated safely for 35 years was dismantled because one subcontractor, trying to save money, had delivered a part that was destined to fail. The woman who died never knew that the train she trusted had been held together by defective welds, and her family will carry that truth forever. And finally, to Ohio, where opening night at the State Fair would end with a sound that silenced everything. Because when a pendulum ride snapped mid-swing, one young man's future was stolen in an instant. July 26, 2017. Opening night at the Ohio State Fair in Columbus. Tyler Jarrell, just 18, had graduated high school weeks earlier and enlisted in the U.S. Marines. This was his last night of freedom before basic training. He stood in line with his girlfriend, Keziah Lewis, excited to ride the Fireball, a massive pendulum that swung riders 40 feet into the air while spinning them at 13 revolutions per minute. The ride had been inspected 3 times that day by Ohio state officials. Bolts checked, hydraulics tested, everything appeared normal. What they couldn't see was the corrosion inside the gondola support beam, eating away at the steel until only a fragile shell remained. 18 years of moisture and stress had weakened the metal to half its designed thickness. At 7:24 p.m., the Fireball reached its peak. Then, the support beam cracked. The entire row of seats, with Tyler, Keziah, and 4 others still strapped in, tore free and launched 20 feet through the air before slamming into the concrete midway. Tyler Jarrell was killed on impact. Blunt force trauma to the head, chest, and lower body. Keziah survived, but with injuries so severe, her medical bills exceeded $2 million. Crushed bones, internal trauma, years of surgeries. Her life, as she'd known it, was over. Ohio shut down every ride at the fair. Governor John Kasich arrived that night, shaken. "The fair is about the best things in life," he said, "and tonight it becomes a terrible tragedy." KMG International's investigation confirmed excessive internal corrosion. Visual inspections couldn't detect it. Only ultrasonic testing could have revealed the damage. No state required those tests. In July 2024, a court awarded Keziah $20 million. Tyler's family received compensation. Total verdicts exceeded $78 million. In 2020, Ohio passed Tyler's Law, requiring stricter inspections and structural testing of all carnival rides. Named for the young man who never got to wear his Marine uniform. The Fireball still operates today under different names at fairs across America. For Keziah, who learned to walk again over years of painful rehabilitation, the sound of metal snapping will echo in her mind forever. Tyler should have been a Marine. Instead, he became a statistic, a name on a law, a reminder that sometimes trust costs everything. 6 accidents, 6 lives stolen or shattered. From roller coasters that tore themselves apart to rides where warnings were ignored, these stories reveal how quickly joy can turn to tragedy. The Smilers' survivors live with amputations and chronic pain. Kate Goodchild's children grew up without their mother. Tyree Sampson's teammates will never forget watching him fall. And Tyler Jarrell never got to serve his country. These accidents changed laws, closed rides, and cost companies hundreds of millions. But no verdict, no fine, no reform can undo what happened. For the families who lost someone, for the survivors who carry the scars, these 6 accidents aren't just stories. They're memories that surface every time they see a theme park, every time they hear a roller coaster roar by. Every time they're reminded that the machines we trust with our lives don't always keep their promises. These 6 accidents will haunt them forever. And now, they'll haunt you, too. Water parks promise escape, a day of sunshine, laughter, and adrenaline rushing through your veins as you plunge down towering slides. Millions visit these parks every summer, trusting that the rides are safe, that the engineers got it right, that nothing could possibly go wrong. But for the 4 stories you're about to hear, that trust was shattered. Each of these accidents was caught on camera, preserved forever in footage that investigators, families, and the world would never forget. From the world's tallest water slide to an opening day disaster, these are 4 water park tragedies where the cameras kept rolling and the evidence couldn't be hidden. Because sometimes the worst moments are the ones we can never unsee. August 7th, 2016. Schlitterbahn Water Park, Kansas City. It was Elected Officials Day, a summer tradition where Kansas lawmakers and their families received free admission. Among them was 10-year-old Caleb Schwab, a freckled boy with bright eyes and endless energy. His father, Scott Schwab, a state representative, watched from below as Caleb climbed the 264 steps to the top of Verrückt, German for insane, the world's tallest water slide. At 168 feet, it towered over the park like a skyscraper made of steel and fiberglass. Caleb reached the top and climbed into a 3-person raft with 2 women he'd just met, strangers paired together to balance the weight. The restraint system was simple: Velcro straps across the waist and shoulders, nothing more. As the raft tipped forward and gravity took over, Caleb's world became a blur of speed and wind. 70 miles per hour down a near vertical drop, then up a second hill that launched the raft briefly into the air. That's when it happened. As the raft went airborne over the hump, the weight distribution shifted. Caleb was the lightest, seated in the front. The raft tilted, his small body lifted, and his head struck the metal hoops supporting the safety netting overhead. The 2 women in the raft felt the impact, but didn't understand what had happened until they reached the bottom. Blood covered their faces. The raft was empty. Caleb Schwab was gone. Park guests at the bottom looked up and saw his body still on the slide, motionless. A witness named Esteban Castañeda later told ABC News what he saw. "I heard booms coming from the area of the slide," he said. "Then I saw a body wash down directly after the raft. Lifeguards tried to push the crowd back. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Caleb had been decapitated." The force of striking the metal hoop had severed his neck instantly. His father, who had waved to him at the top of those 264 steps, never saw his son come down alive. The investigation revealed a pattern of reckless design. Verrückt had been conceived in 2012 as a publicity stunt for the Travel Channel's show Extreme Water Parks. Jeff Henry, Schlitterbahn's co-owner, and John Schooley, the designer, had no engineering credentials. They built the slide in 20 months, rushing through construction to meet the TV show's deadline. During testing, sandbags flew off the slide. Rafts went airborne. Engineers raised concerns. Henry and Schooley ignored them, adding netting and metal hoops as an afterthought. Investigators later discovered at least 13 other riders had been injured hitting those same hoops before Caleb's death. None of the incidents were reported. The park had covered them up. In 2018, Henry and Schooley were charged with second-degree murder. The charges were eventually dismissed on technicalities, but the damage was done. The Schwab family received a $20 million settlement. Verrückt was demolished in 2019. Kansas passed new waterslide inspection laws, but for Scott and Michelle Schwab, no law could bring back their son. Caleb had climbed those stairs excited for the thrill of his life. He never made it down. From a slide built for television to a park that became a legend for all the wrong reasons. Because in New Jersey, one water park's reputation for danger would earn it a nickname no park wants. Accident Park. 1980s, Vernon, New Jersey. Action Park opened in 1978 with a promise that sounded too good to be true. A park where guests controlled their own adventure, where rules were loose, and where danger was part of the thrill. The Alpine slide sent riders down a concrete track with no restraints, just a handbrake that barely worked. The Cannonball Loop was a water slide with a full vertical loop that sent test dummies out decapitated. And at the center of it all was the wave pool, a massive body of water where enormous artificial waves crashed over swimmers every few minutes. Lifeguards nicknamed it the Grave Pool. On opening day in 1979, they performed over 100 rescues, 100 in a single afternoon. Most were children who'd been swept under by waves too powerful for them to fight. Some were teenagers who thought they could handle it until the water pulled them down and held them there. The waves were controlled by industrial fans that park management kept at maximum power because, as one former employee later said, bigger waves meant more screams, and more screams meant people were having fun. But the screams weren't always from fun. Between 1978 and 1996, Action Park recorded 6 deaths. Multiple drownings occurred in the wave pool, though the exact number was never fully disclosed. The park's insurance company eventually refused to cover them, forcing Action Park's owners to form their own insurance subsidiary. They were sued so many times that legal fees became a line item in the annual budget. Dozens of guests were hospitalized. Hundreds more left with injuries they didn't report. One of the most documented deaths occurred in 1982 on the Kayak Experience, a ride where guests paddled through a water channel. A 27-year-old man from Long Island stepped out of his kayak to flip it upright after it tipped over. His foot touched an underwater grate. The grate was in contact with exposed electrical wiring from the submerged fans. The shock sent him into cardiac arrest. He was pulled from the water and rushed to a nearby hospital, where he died hours later. The coroner confirmed electrocution. Action Park initially denied it, claiming there were no burns on his body. The coroner responded that water-based electrocutions don't leave burns. The park was shut down for investigation. Inspectors found the wiring had been exposed for weeks, maybe months. Employees had noticed it. No one had reported it. The Kayak Experience never reopened. Former employees later revealed that rides at Action Park were inspected by the park's own staff, many of them teenagers who had no training and no idea what they were looking for. If a ride broke, they fixed it with duct tape and prayer. If someone got hurt, they were told to walk it off. Action Park finally closed in 1996 after a landslide of lawsuits. It briefly reopened in 2014 under new management with updated safety measures, then closed again in 2016. The wave pool still stands, drained and empty, surrounded by chain-link fences and no trespassing signs. For those who survived the grave pool, the memory of being pulled under, of fighting for air, of hearing lifeguard whistles screaming over the roar of mechanical waves will never fade. Action Park was a place where fun came with a body count, and the cameras, both news crews and guests with camcorders, captured every moment of the chaos. From a park that ignored safety for decades to a slide that failed in a single afternoon. Because in British Columbia, a crack in fiberglass would turn a family's day into a nightmare. July 14th, 2024, Bridal Falls Water Park, British Columbia. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that draws families to outdoor pools and twisting tube slides. The park had been operating since the 1980s, a modest attraction tucked into the Fraser Valley with aging slides that hadn't seen major renovations in years. That afternoon, the tube slide was busy. Riders climbed the tower, grabbed their mat, and plunged into darkness, spiraling down through 7 enclosed flume sections before splashing into the exit pool. At 2:45 p.m., a rider emerged from the slide with a deep gash on their foot, blood streaming into the water. First aid was called, An ambulance arrived, but before park management could investigate, more riders came down reporting torn bathing suits, scraped skin, and cuts. One injured their ankle. By 3:30 p.m., nearly an hour after the first injury, the general manager was finally informed of an irregularity on the slide. He inspected it and found a crack at the bottom of the 7th flume section, a jagged tear in the fiberglass where the surface had split open. Instead of evacuating riders out through maintenance hatches, the manager made a decision. He would close the slide, but first, he'd evacuate the remaining riders in the queue by sending them down the slide. A slide attendant entered the flume to push riders around the crack, but despite those efforts, one rider, an 11-year-old girl, passed directly over the crack at 3:34 p.m. The broken fiberglass ripped into her leg, tearing tissue and muscle. Her screams echoed through the tube. When she emerged at the bottom, blood poured from a gash so severe it exposed bone. She was rushed to the hospital, her recovery expected to be long-term. The investigation by Technical Safety BC uncovered the root cause. The slide's underground wooden support structure had rotted away years earlier. Without support, the fiberglass had bulged and deformed. That morning, the slide had passed its daily inspection, but the crack had formed and grown throughout the day, progressing so quickly that staff didn't realize how dangerous it had become. The decision to evacuate riders down the slide rather than out resulted in the worst injury. The general manager claimed he didn't understand the severity. Investigators concluded that staff lacked the training to assess the hazard. Bridal Falls may not reopen that slide until Technical Safety BC approves a full reconstruction. For the 11-year-old girl and the others who were injured that afternoon, the memory of sliding through darkness and feeling their skin tear open will linger. The crack had been there all day, invisible beneath turbulent water, and management, in their rush to clear the queue, sent children directly into it. And finally, to California, where a brand new water park's opening day would be captured on camera by news crews expecting celebration. What they recorded instead was a boy flying through the air. May 27, 2017, Dublin, California. The Wave Water Park was opening its gates for the first time, a $43 million project years in the making. News crews lined the park, cameras rolling, capturing families streaming through the entrance. Among them was a 10-year-old boy, excited to be one of the first to ride the Emerald Plunge, a 3-story open slide that promised an 80-degree drop and speeds that would take your breath away. The slide had been tested extensively. Engineers had run it through dozens of cycles. Cal-OSHA, California's state safety inspectors, had certified it just 24 hours earlier. At noon, the boy climbed to the top, crossed his arms over his chest as instructed, and pushed off. Cameras from the Bay Area news group captured what happened next. The boy accelerated down the slide, water spraying behind him. At the bottom, where the slide was supposed to flatten out and slow him down, he hit a trough of water at full speed. The force launched him upward. His body glided across the slide's side wall, over the edge, and onto the concrete below. He skidded across the ground, his back scraping against the rough surface, before finally coming to a stop. Witnesses said the sound was a sickening thud that silenced the crowd. John Rodhams, Dublin's Parks and Recreation Director, rushed to the scene. The wave took them over the edge of the catch basin, he later explained. They rode that edge for a little bit and then got scraped up on the cement. Miraculously, the boy survived. First aid treated him on site. He walked away with scratches on his shoulder and back, stunned but alive. His parents took him to the hospital for further examination, and he was released the same day. But the incident had been caught on camera, broadcast on local news, and uploaded to YouTube within hours. The Wave's grand opening, meant to be a celebration, had turned into a public relations disaster. The Emerald Plunge was shut down immediately. 2 adjacent slides were also closed. State investigators, along with representatives from Whitewater, the slide's manufacturer, arrived the next day to determine what had gone wrong. The investigation found that the slide's water pressure and flow rate hadn't accounted for lighter riders. The boy weighed less than the test dummies used during safety trials. When he hit the catch basin at the bottom, there wasn't enough water to slow him down. Instead, the shallow trough acted like a ramp, launching him over the wall. Park officials admitted they might need to add weight requirements or increase water pressure. Some witnesses claimed the boy hadn't followed instructions, that his legs were uncrossed when they should have been together. But video footage showed he was in the correct position. The slide remained closed for weeks while engineers redesigned the exit section. When it eventually reopened, new warnings were posted, water flow was increased, and additional padding was installed along the walls. But for the boy who was thrown from the slide on opening day, for his parents who watched him skid across concrete, the trust was broken. The wave had promised a perfect summer, and instead delivered a moment captured on camera that would replay in their minds forever. The boy walked away, but the footage of his ejection, his body sliding across that wall, his impact on the concrete, remains online. A reminder that even brand new slides, certified safe just hours earlier, can fail when it matters most. 4 water parks, 4 accidents caught on camera. From Caleb Schwab's fatal ride down Verrucht to the boy ejected on opening day in California, these stories prove that footage doesn't lie. Investigators reviewed the videos frame by frame. Families watched them in courtrooms, tears streaming as they saw their loved ones' final moments. And we, the public, witnessed how quickly water parks can turn from paradise to nightmare. These weren't freak accidents. They were the result of rushed construction, ignored warnings, cost-cutting decisions, and a belief that bigger, faster, and more extreme was always better. Verrucht was demolished. Action Park is abandoned. Bridal Falls is under investigation. The wave added safety measures, but the cameras captured something none of them can erase. The moment when fun became tragedy. The instant when trust was broken. The second when everything changed. For the families who lost someone, for the survivors who carry the scars, these 4 accidents aren't just viral videos or documentary footage. They're memories burned into their minds forever. Caleb Schwab never came home from Schlitterbahn. The 11-year-old at Bridal Falls will carry that scar for life. And every frame of footage, every angle captured, every second preserved, ensures that we'll never forget what happened when water parks failed the people who trusted them most. Welcome to Abandoned Thrills, where we document the accidents that changed everything. Subscribe if you want more stories like these. The cameras don't lie, and neither do we. There's a document that gets produced after every one of these incidents. It's called an investigation report. And somewhere in every investigation report, there's a sentence that reads, in some variation, the same way. The failure was foreseeable. The warning existed. The inspection was not performed to the required standard. Not, this was an act of God. Not, nobody could have predicted this. The opposite. The finding again and again is that the information was available in a maintenance log, in a manufacturer's manual, in a recommended inspection interval. And something, somewhere in the system, chose not to act on it.
2 people have been killed and 26 injured in an adventure park when
We are learning more about the roller coaster incident that happened yesterday at Cedar Point. It sent 1 guest to the hospital.
6 rides. 6 moments when the structure holding passengers in the air gave way. In front of crowds, in front of families, and in front of cameras that were never supposed to document what they recorded. From a launch cable that exploded at 82 miles per hour, to a pendulum shaft that snapped in 2 with 32 people aboard. The footage in every story you're about to watch exists. the machines broke in public. The paperwork explains why. This is Abandoned Thrills. September 16, 2009. Knott's Berry Farm, Buena Park, California. The Accelerator roller coaster, a 205-foot hydraulic launch ride that fires its passengers to 82 miles per hour in 2.3 seconds, had been running without incident all morning. Kyle Wheeler, 12 years old, took his seat in the front row. His father, Russell, was beside him. The front row was where every kid wanted to sit. The full force of the launch, the clearest possible view of what was coming. What was coming, neither of them could have anticipated. The accelerator used a hydraulic launch cable under enormous tension. That cable was subject to fatigue over time, and Intamin, the ride's manufacturer, had specifically recommended it be inspected every month. Knott's Berry Farm had decided on 6 months instead. On September 16th, they were nearly 3 weeks overdue on even that reduced standard. The cable in use had not been assessed since December. The manufacturer's recommended inspection interval, monthly, existed in writing in the manual provided to the park. Not followed. Not once in the cable's operational life had anyone asked why. At approximately 4 p.m., the train carrying Kyle and his father in the front car entered the launch sequence. 4 seconds in, the cable failed. It snapped under the pressure of the launch and whipped backward through the train. It struck Kyle Wheeler in the leg, a deep, jagged laceration that severed muscle tissue. It struck his father in the face. The train, its propulsion cut, coasted to a stop. What makes this incident unlike almost any other is what came next. The accelerator had an on-ride camera, installed to sell souvenir footage to riders. The moment the cable snapped, the debris flying through the air, the wheelers being struck, all of it was recorded from inside the train. That footage leaked to YouTube. News stations across California broadcast it the same evening. Both Kyle and his father were transported to a local hospital. Kyle's injuries required immediate surgical intervention. What was reported as a laceration was damage significant enough to require skin grafting, physical rehabilitation, and months of ongoing care. His mother, Anita Wheeler, had been watching from the ground when the cable failed. Knott's Berry Farm spokeswoman Jennifer Blasey confirmed the incident and announced the ride was closed. Park officials said their crews had followed proper protocols. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health investigated and found otherwise. The state's finding was unambiguous. The accident could have been avoided. The cable had not been inspected on the manufacturer's recommended monthly schedule. It had not been replaced when it should have been. Knott's Berry Farm was operating a hydraulic launch cable on a timeline of their own choosing, one that bore no relation to the one their manufacturer had specified. Knott's Berry Farm reached a confidential financial settlement with the Wheeler family. Kyle underwent multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy. His attorney confirmed he would require a further operation, valued at $30,000, to remove accumulated scar tissue years into the future. Medical bills had already surpassed $60,000 at time of settlement. The accelerator was modified and eventually reopened. The footage of the cable snapping has never disappeared from the internet. Kyle Wheeler was 12 years old and in the front row because that is where kids want to sit. The camera that documented what happened was installed to sell souvenirs. It became evidence instead. Knott's Berry Farm had the inspection schedule from the manufacturer. They chose a different one. The cable wore out on their schedule, not Intamin's. Half a world away, 10 years later, a ride would not break a cable, it would break the entire machine. And nobody would have any documentation of its last inspection at all. July 14th, 2019. Kankaria Amusement Park, Ahmedabad, India. The Discovery Ride, a 32-seat pendulum attraction that swings its passengers in wide climbing arcs, was one of the park's busiest attractions on a Sunday afternoon. Families, friends, a full load. Rising to roughly 60 feet at the apex of each swing, a normal Sunday. The Discovery Ride operates on a single structural principle. A main shaft powers the pendulum arm that carries the gondola. The integrity of that shaft is the single most critical safety factor on the machine. If it holds, everyone rides. If it fails, there is no secondary system, no backup, no catch. The shaft in use at Kankaria that afternoon had not been inspected to any documented standard. There is no record in any subsequent investigation of the shaft having been opened for internal examination. There is no record of material fatigue having been assessed. There is a shaft. There is a ride. There are 32 passengers. And there is nothing between those 32 passengers and whatever the shaft contains. The main shaft snapped. Not cracked, not bent, snapped, splitting the ride at its structural center. The gondola carrying 32 people came crashing to the ground. Bystanders had their phones out. The footage reached social media within the hour and international news outlets the same day. It shows the arm in mid-swing, passengers visible in their seats, and then the collapse. 2 people were killed. 29 were injured. Ahmedabad's chief fire officer, M.F. Dastur, confirmed the cause to the press. The pipe of the main shaft broke and crashed on the ground. Emergency services responded. Dozens of casualties required hospital care. The park was shut immediately. Ahmedabad Municipal Commissioner Vijay Nehra directed police to launch a criminal investigation. The question was no longer whether the ride had failed. The footage answered that. The question was how long the failure had been building and who had been responsible for the maintenance that would have found it. Investigators from the Forensic Science Laboratory were brought in to examine the structural failure. What emerged was a finding consistent with amusement ride disasters across every country. Internal metal fatigue, invisible from the outside, undetected until it expressed itself catastrophically at 60 feet in the air. A criminal investigation was launched to determine whether the park had met the inspection requirements necessary to identify this kind of structural deterioration. No record of those inspections having been performed to the required standard was produced. 32 people had been loaded onto a gondola supported by a shaft that would not hold them. Nobody had opened it to check. 2 people did not leave Kankaria that Sunday. The footage spread to every continent within hours. Both stories so far share the same architecture: a maintenance schedule not followed, an inspection interval not met, a component that should have been checked and wasn't. The next story is different. At Cedar Point in Ohio, the inspection was completed the evening before the accident. The ride passed, an inspector signed off, and the next morning, Rachel Hawes was standing in line for a coaster whose bracket was still coming loose, in a way no visual inspection could have detected, because nobody had asked the right kind of question. August 15th, 2021, Cedar Point, Sandusky, Ohio. When Top Thrill Dragster opened in 2003, it was the tallest roller coaster in the world, 420 feet, with a launch to 120 miles per hour in 3.8 seconds. By the summer of 2021, 18 million people had ridden it. It was considered one of the great engineering achievements in the history of the industry. Rachel Hawes, 44 years old, of Swartz Creek, Michigan, was not on the ride. She was standing in line, waiting her turn, when the train passed overhead. Each train on the dragster carried dozens of small mechanical components, bolts, brackets, plates, designed to withstand thousands of high-speed cycles. One of those components was a proximity flag plate, an L-shaped metal bracket, roughly the size of an adult hand, attached to the rear of a train car by a series of bolts. The Ohio Department of Agriculture's subsequent investigation found that half of those bolts had come loose. Across multiple sections of the track, directly above the queue area where guests waited, there were signs of wear, deformation, and impact marks that had accumulated over time. The ride had been inspected the previous evening. It had passed. Because the inspection was visual, and the bolt deterioration was not visible. And nobody had asked at any point in the dragster's 18-year operating history whether a visual inspection of this component was sufficient for a machine that launched its trains at 120 miles per hour. At some point during that Sunday's operating day, as a train completed its circuit and returned toward the station, the flag plate dislodged from the rear car. It struck Rachel Hawes in the back of the head. Body camera footage from first responders was obtained and broadcast by local television news within days. Chaotic scenes at the ride's exit, emergency personnel responding. One witness told 3 News, "Everybody's running, and so I went the other direction to try and find her."
We all saw it fly off. On the top of one of those things and shot downward.
Rachel Hawes was transported first to an area hospital, then to a trauma center in Toledo. Her family confirmed she had suffered a traumatic brain injury, a skull fracture, subarachnoid hemorrhage, bleeding in the tissue surrounding the brain. She was fighting for her life. The ride closed immediately. Cedar Point announced the dragster would not reopen for the remainder of the 2021 season. The Ohio Department of Agriculture began its investigation within days. The ODA's investigation, completed in February 2022, confirmed that half the bolts securing the flag plate had failed, and the plate had dislodged as a result. The investigation found signs of wear, deformation, and impact marking on the track sections directly above the queue. Evidence the problem had been developing across multiple rides over time in a location that a standard visual inspection would not have flagged. The ODA found Cedar Point had not violated state law. No criminal charges were filed. Cedar Fair reached a confidential financial settlement with Rachel Hawes. Her medical bills had already exceeded $2 million. Future costs were projected to surpass $10 million. Her lawsuit stated she had been rendered permanently disabled and would no longer be able to work. Top Thrill Dragster never reopened in its original form. Cedar Point contracted Zamperla to redesign it from scratch. It reopened in 2024 as Top Thrill 2. 18 million rides. Then a Sunday afternoon. Then a bracket the size of a hand. The inspection the night before had found nothing. It wasn't incompetent. It was the wrong kind of inspection for the failure that was developing. A visual check of a component whose failure mode was internal, bolt fatigue, hidden stress, deterioration you cannot see from the outside. Knott's Berry Farm ignored the inspection schedule. Cancaria had no inspection record at all. Cedar Point followed the schedule and still missed it, because the schedule didn't ask the right questions. The next story is about a roller coaster whose replacement parts were certified, installed, signed off, and still catastrophically wrong, because no one in the chain of custody had checked whether the parts they ordered matched the specifications they needed. If you're watching this on your TV, phone, phone or any other device right now, and you want to see more stories like these, the Abandoned Thrills channel has documented amusement park accidents, the investigations that followed, and the changes that came after, or didn't. Search Abandoned Thrills on YouTube. June 25th, 2023, 11:36 in the morning, Stockholm, Sweden. Gröna Lund has been operating since 1883, one of the oldest continuously running amusement parks in Europe. On a clear Sunday morning in June, the park was full. The Jetline roller coaster, a 98-foot steel coaster reaching 56 miles per hour, had been running at the park since 1988. Karin Elmegard and her husband Mikael were in the rear car of Train E, 14 riders aboard, a routine summer morning. In 2019, Gröna Lund's maintenance team had discovered cracks in the front control arm of one of the Jetline's trains, the structural component that carries the wheels and keeps the train on the track. The decision was made to replace the front control arms across the entire fleet. The replacement arms were ordered from a Swedish subcontractor, Mekosmos AB, who outsourced the manufacturing to a company called GMW. What arrived deviated from the original Schwarzkopf design specifications. A required backing bar was missing. Several welds contained significant structural defects. The finished components had substantially reduced load-bearing capacity. They were delivered to Gröna Lund. They were installed. They were certified. The Jetline reopened with them fitted. The Swedish Accident Investigation Authority's report would later note that the deviations from specification were not checked against the original drawings at any point in the process, not when ordered, not when received, not when installed. March 2023, 3 months before the accident. As Train E approached its third rise, the defective front control arm fractured. The original design would have withstood the operational forces. This replacement could not. The front car partially derailed. The train came to a sudden, violent stop at height. 3 riders were thrown. Karin Elmegard fell 20 feet to the ground. Her husband, Mikael, also ejected, grabbed a structural beam and held on. He watched his wife fall from where he was clinging in midair. Bystanders filmed it. The park's own CCTV footage was played in open court in Stockholm in November 2025, showing the moment 2 passengers were separated from the carriage. The first emergency call reached SOS alarm at 11:38 a.m., 2 minutes after the derailment. Fire services arrived at 11:45. Riders were found on the ground and others trapped in the partially derailed train. One woman in her 30s was pronounced dead at the scene. 9 people were hospitalized. 3 of the injured were children. Speaking in court in November 2025, Mikael Elmegard described the moment. "It was horrifying to see my wife fall out of the car. When I saw her lying on the ground, her face covered in blood, I didn't know if she had survived." The Swedish Accident Investigation Authority published its full report on June 14, 2024. The finding was precise. The replacement control arm had been manufactured with defective welds and without the structural backing bar specified in the original design. It lacked the load-bearing capacity to operate safely. It had been installed, certified, and run for 3 months before it gave way. 3 organizations were found responsible: Gröna Lund, which placed an insufficiently specified order; Mekosmos, which subcontracted without adequate oversight; and GMW, which manufactured the defective component. On January 28, 2026, the Stockholm District Court convicted Gröna Lund and imposed a fine of 5.2 million Swedish kroner. The Jetline was permanently closed and demolished. Its 35-year operating history ended on a June morning when a replacement part, ordered to fix a safety problem, manufactured with new safety problems, installed without anyone checking whether the new part matched the old specification, could no longer hold the weight of the train. Mikael Elmegard survived by grabbing a beam in midair. Karin Elmegard required surgery. One person did not come home from Gröna Lund that morning. The parts were ordered to make the ride safer. The problem was in the order. Nobody checked. 4 rides, 4 different failure modes, a schedule ignored, an inspection that didn't exist, a check that was the wrong type, and now a part that was certified incorrect. The next 2 stories don't involve fixed parks with engineering departments and corporate parents. They involve rides that travel. Rides assembled at night in car parks and fairgrounds, permitted by local authorities, inspected, if inspected at all, in the hours before they open. The next story takes place at a fair that was extended past its closing date. Because a local authority issued a permission, and nobody checked whether the drop tower that would fall from 50 feet had been verified as safe for an extra week of operation. September 4th, 2022, Mohali, Punjab, India. A traveling fair had been operating in the city since late August. It had been officially extended. Originally due to close August 31st, it received permission to continue through September 11th. Among its attractions was a drop tower, a vertical structure that carries passengers up on a circular platform, then drops them in a controlled freefall. At approximately 9:15 in the evening, the platform was occupied. Passengers seated, the tower in operation. Drop tower rides depend entirely on one system: mechanical braking that arrests the platform's descent before it reaches the ground. Without that engagement, there is no backup, no secondary arrest, nothing. The platform was approximately 50 feet in the air. Fair organizers would later describe a technical issue. No detailed inspection documentation for this ride, during the extension period that took it past its permitted close date, was produced to establish the machine had been verified as safe for continued operation. There is the permission to extend. There is the ride. There is no record that connects one to the other. The braking system failed to engage. The circular platform fell from 50 feet without deceleration. It struck the ground at speed. Video captured by bystanders was posted to social media the same evening. It circulated internationally within hours, showing the platform reaching its apex and then dropping uncontrolled into the ground below. 16 people were hospitalized. A number were children. Witnesses described immediate chaos. Reports from the scene noted ambulances were delayed and no on-site safety personnel had the resources to provide immediate medical intervention. The ride was shut. The fair continued operating its other attractions. That the fair remained open at all in the hours after an incident that hospitalized 16 people, including children, drew immediate public outrage across Indian and international media. Authorities opened an investigation into the mechanical failure and into the licensing conditions under which the extended fair had been permitted to operate. The organizers acknowledged the technical issue. They did not explain what had failed, when it had last been assessed, or what the inspection requirements were for the extension period. The investigation identified a pattern consistent with traveling fair incidents across multiple countries. Rides assembled and disassembled across locations, operated under inconsistent regulatory oversight, inspected, Where inspected at all, without the technical specificity required to detect internal deterioration. There is a permission to extend. There is a ride. 16 people go to hospital. And nobody who issued the permission had required anyone to answer, "Has this machine been verified as safe for the extra 11 days?" The families at the Mohali Fair that evening had come out for an extra night of a fair that had already been given extra time. They were there because the extension was granted. Everything that followed was filmed and watched around the world. The final story in this video ends with an 18-year-old named Tyler Jarrell, who had signed his Marine Corps enlistment papers 4 days before the night that killed him. His ride didn't fail because the inspection was the wrong kind. It didn't fail because a replacement part was incorrectly manufactured. It failed because the ride itself was 19 years old. And in 19 years of operation, nobody had ever required anyone to open the gondola arm and look at what was happening to the metal inside it. The corrosion had been building since 1998. July 26, 2017, Columbus, Ohio. The first night of the Ohio State Fair. Tyler Jarrell was 18 years old. He'd graduated from Franklin Heights High School that spring. 4 days earlier, on July 22, 2017, he had walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office and signed his enlistment papers. He was scheduled to begin basic training the following year. He went to the fair that evening with his girlfriend, Keziah Lewis, 19 years old, a student at the University of Cincinnati. They joined the line for the Fireball. The Fireball was a pendulum ride manufactured by KMG, a Dutch company, in 1998. It swung 24 riders back and forth in a 40-foot arc, spinning the gondola at the top of each swing. On the operating company's website, it was described as one of the most popular rides on the Midway. What it was not described as was 19 years old. 19 years of cycles, of stress, of exposure. The gondola support arm, the structural component connecting the passenger section to the main drive, had been corroding from the inside. Not on the surface where an inspector could see it. Inside, hidden behind the exterior metal casing, the wall thickness of the beam had been catastrophically reduced by oxidization. Ohio State officials had inspected the Fireball 3 or 4 times before the fair opened. None of those inspections had required the beam to be opened. The corrosion had been building since the Clinton administration. Nobody had ever looked for it. Nothing in any inspection protocol, state, manufacturer, or fair operator, required anyone to open that beam and measure what was left of the wall inside. At approximately 7:24 p.m., the Fireball was mid-cycle, passengers at the peak of the arc, when the support arm fractured. An entire row of 4 seats detached from the ride. The riders were ejected at high speed and traveled 20 to 30 feet before striking the ground. Julian Bellinger was standing in line. He had his phone out. His footage, broadcast on ABC News, NBC, and every major national outlet within hours, showed the arm snapping, the row of seats separating from the gondola, and riders flying through the air at the top of the swing. Kaylee Bellamy was next in line. She described it this way. "The ride was going as normal, and then I saw somebody fall on the ride, and then a minute later, the whole row of seats fell off." Ohio State Highway Patrol Superintendent Colonel Paul Pride confirmed it to the press. 1 person had died at the scene. 7 others were transported to hospital, 3 in critical condition. Tyler Jarrell was the person who died. He was pronounced dead from blunt force trauma. Keziah Lewis, his girlfriend, was in critical condition. She had suffered a shattered pelvis, a broken ankle, and broken ribs. When she regained consciousness in hospital, she kept asking for Tyler. Her mother, Clarissa Williams, had to tell her that he was gone. Tyler's father, Anthony Jarrell, spoke to the press the following day. He was loved and had a future until the disaster at the Ohio Fair. My question is, who is responsible for not doing their job of inspecting the rides? KMG, the Dutch manufacturer, issued their findings 9 days after the incident. The conclusion? Excessive corrosion on the interior of the gondola support beam dangerously reduced the beam's wall thickness over the years. This finally led to the catastrophic failure of the ride during operation. The corrosion had been invisible. It existed inside the structural member, behind the outer casing. No external inspection, by the fair, by the state, or by the manufacturer's own representatives, had ever required the beam to be opened and examined internally. In 19 years. In 2024, a New Jersey court awarded 4 survivors of the Fireball accident a combined $78 million judgment against KMG Rides. Keziah Lewis received $20 million. Speaking to local news in 2024, 7 years after the accident, she described going on a cruise, attending music festivals, working through her recovery step by step. I feel like I'm just knocking off things off my bucket list, she said, and healing my inner child slowly. Ohio passed Tyler's Law in the aftermath of his death, mandating additional safety requirements for amusement rides across the state. Tennessee, California, Indiana, and Kentucky issued bans on all Fireball rides. Multiple countries opened reviews of the same model. The United States Marine Corps issued a statement upon confirming Tyler's enlistment. We are truly proud to have known him as one of the brave few willing to step up and serve his country. He was 18 years old. He had a girlfriend who loved him, a branch of the military waiting for him, and one last night at the Ohio State Fair before everything started. The support arm that killed him had been corroding in the dark for years, in a place no inspector ever looked, deteriorating cycle by cycle until July 26, 2017, when it could no longer hold. The footage exists, the verdict has been delivered, and Tyler Jarrell's name is remembered. Stories like these deserve to be remembered. And if you believe that too, Abandoned Thrills documents them every week. 6 rides, 6 investigations, 6 reports that found in some version of the same language the same thing. A cable inspected every 6 months instead of every month, because nobody at Knott's Berry Farm had questioned a schedule they chose for themselves. A pendulum shaft at Cancaria that had never been opened for examination on a ride that had no documented inspection at all. A metal bracket at Cedar Point shedding its bolts through thousands of cycles directly above a queue of guests in a way a visual inspection could never have detected. Because the inspection protocol didn't ask the right question. A replacement control arm in Stockholm ordered to fix a safety problem, manufactured with defective welds and missing a required backing bar, installed and certified without anyone verifying whether it matched the original specification. A drop tower at a traveling fair in Mohali extended past its permitted close date, falling from 50 feet when its brakes failed to engage, with no inspection documentation produced for the extension period. And a pendulum ride at the Ohio State Fair, 19 years old, corroding from the inside on a beam nobody in 19 years of operation had had ever opened to examine. Each failure had a specific name. Each name was in a document before the incident. The cable inspection interval was in Intamin's manual. The required backing bar was in Schwarzkopf's original drawings. The beam's interior was accessible. It required a tool and a decision to use it and a protocol that said to do so. None of those protocols existed. Top Thrill Dragster reopened in 2024 as Top Thrill 2, a new ride built by a different manufacturer. The queue for it passes over the section of track where Rachel Hawes was standing when the bracket struck her. The Fireball model KMG, manufactured in 1998, the same model, the same design, operated at fairs across 12 states in the years after Tyler Jarrell died. Tyler's Law is now on the books in Ohio. The state that passed it still does not require an inspector to open the gondola beam. The machines break in public. The paperwork explains why. And in the years after each of these incidents, some of what the paperwork required was changed. Some of it wasn't. This has been Abandoned Thrills, where we document the accidents that changed everything. Subscribe to make sure you never miss the next one. Walt Disney called it the happiest place on Earth. And for hundreds of millions of people, that's exactly what it is. A place where the music never stops, where the lights never go out, where the magic is so carefully constructed, so precisely engineered, that nothing could ever go wrong. Except that it has. 6 times that most people have never heard about. A teenager whose seatbelt held a secret no one ever solved. A 2-year-old whose father put his bare hands inside an alligator's mouth. A pilot who spent his final seconds trying to save 6 strangers he'd never met. These are the 6 Disney park accidents that changed everything. The ones that forced the company to confront what happens when the magic runs out. Welcome to Abandoned Thrills. Deborah Gale Stone had just graduated high school. She was 18 years old, 5'2", an honor roll student, a star athlete, editor of her yearbook at Santa Ana High School, the kind of person who lights up every room she walks into. Her friends remembered her as warm, kind, relentlessly cheerful. She had enrolled at Iowa State University and was counting down the weeks until she left for college in the fall. But she needed money first. So in early June 1974, Deborah applied for a summer job at the place she'd grown up visiting, Disneyland. She was hired as a hostess for a brand new attraction in Tomorrowland called America Sings, which opened to the public on June 29th. She was so proud. The attraction was a rotating theater, an outer ring of 6 audience sections that spun slowly counterclockwise around a fixed central stage, carrying guests through 4 acts of American musical history performed by animatronic animals. Deborah's job was to greet each incoming audience over a microphone, then bid them farewell as the theater rotated away to the next scene. It was a perfectly ordinary role on a perfectly ordinary ride. It had been open for 9 days. On the evening of July 8, 1974, at around 10:37 p.m., during the 45-second interval between performances, when one audience section had left and the next hadn't yet arrived, Deborah was standing at the edge of the stage. The wall began to move. What happened next is still not fully certain. She may have stepped back. She may have tried to cross from one stage to another, but for a reason no one could ever fully explain, she found herself in the narrow channel between the rotating outer wall and the fixed inner stage. And the wall did not stop. An Air Force member named Daniel Robison, sitting in an adjacent theater with his family, heard screaming and realized it was not part of the show. He alerted staff immediately, but by the time they reached her, Deborah Gale Stone was already gone. She was pronounced dead at 11 p.m. She was the first employee in Disneyland's 19-year history to be killed in an accident. The investigation revealed a critical design flaw. The attraction America Sings had replaced an earlier show called Carousel of Progress, which had used the same rotating theater but rotated in the opposite direction. The position the hostess took on the stage was identical in both shows, but the reversal of direction had quietly created a deadly gap that no one had modeled in the design phase. In the previous show, the rotation moved the hostess away from the wall. In America Sings, it moved the wall toward her. Disney closed the attraction, installed warning lights, and replaced the solid walls with breakaway versions designed to give workers a chance to escape. 3 days later, America Sings reopened. Deborah's parents received a small settlement. The attraction ran for another 14 years before closing in 1988. And somewhere in the animatronic figures that populated that rotating stage, many of which were later moved into Splash Mountain, the memory of her name was slowly folded into the park itself. For Deborah Stone's family, her loss never faded. She was 18 years old. She was going to Iowa State in the fall. She never got there. It was the middle of winter break. Dolly Regine Young was 48 years old, an Avon representative from Fremont, California, known around her neighborhood as someone who never missed a birthday, never forgot a name, never passed a friend without stopping to ask how they were doing. On January 3rd, 1984, she came to Disneyland with 4 of her close friends, a holiday treat, something to shake off the gray chill of the new year. They decided to ride the Matterhorn bobsleds. The Matterhorn had opened in 1959 as the world's first tubular steel roller coaster, a winding, plunging ride through the simulated Swiss Alps, 147 feet of steel track threading through a man-made mountain in the middle of Tomorrowland. It was Disneyland's signature thrill. By 1984, tens of millions of people had ridden it without incident. Dolly sat alone in the rear seat of the back car, an 8-passenger sled, while her 4 friends loaded into the front. The cars were arranged so that each rider sat one behind the other, and those in front had no way to see the person at the very back. The ride climbed. It descended. It dove through simulated caverns. And then, about 2/3 of the way down the mountain, Dolly Young was no longer in her seat. She had fallen or been thrown onto the track below. In the seconds that followed, the second bobsled came down the mountain at approximately 20 miles per hour. The impact was instant. Her friends didn't realize what had happened until the ride reached the end. Sensors triggered a shutdown about 30 seconds after the collision. Workers arrived to find a scene they would never forget. The detective who later investigated described it plainly. The seatbelt in Dolly's seat was unbuckled, in perfect condition, lying open. Whether it had failed, come undone, or whether Dolly had unfastened it herself for reasons no one could explain, no one ever determined conclusively. It remains unanswered to this day. Dolly Young was the 5th guest to die on a Disneyland attraction. Her family sued Disney for $5 million. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount 4 years later. Disney later redesigned the restraints on the Matterhorn's bobsleds. The company maintained the redesign had nothing to do with the accidents. Today, Disneyland cast members have a name for the section of track where Dolly Young died. They call it Dolly's Dip. Former operators have described an uneasy feeling whenever they walk the track at night. The work lights in that tunnel, they say, are always burned out. They never stay on. Whether that's a ghost story or a safety issue probably depends on who you ask. When Mission Space opened at Epcot in 2003, Disney called it a revolution. And in some ways, it was. The ride used a genuine centrifuge, a spinning capsule that generated up to 2.5 times the force of gravity, to simulate rocket launch, sustained G-force, and the sensation of weightlessness on approach to Mars. It was the most physically intense attraction Disney had ever built. Guests emerged pale, disoriented, exhilarated. The queues stretched for hours. What Disney didn't publicize was this. From the day it opened, Mission Space was generating more reported illnesses and injuries than any other attraction at Walt Disney World, more than twice as many as the next closest ride. On June 13, 2005, a 4-year-old boy named Dowdy Bamuwamye from Sellersville, Pennsylvania, collapsed after exiting the ride. An autopsy later determined he had an undiagnosed heart condition, a thickening of the heart muscle that had gone undetected his entire short life. The G-forces, investigators concluded, had not directly killed him, but his condition had never been screened for. Disney did not have a defibrillator positioned near Mission Space, one of the most physically stressful attractions on their property. Dowdy Bamuwamye was 4 years old. His parents filed a lawsuit in 2006, arguing that Disney should never have allowed a 4-year-old on the attraction at all, and that the medical response after he collapsed was inadequate. The case was settled and dismissed. Less than a year later, on April 12, 2006, a 49-year-old woman named Hiltrud Blumel from Schmitten, Germany, fell ill during the ride and was transported to a nearby hospital. She died from a brain hemorrhage caused by severe, long-standing high blood pressure. The medical examiner's report did not directly link her death to the ride itself. 2 deaths, 11 months apart, same attraction. Disney's response was significant. In 2006, they retrofitted Mission Space with an entirely separate, non-spinning version, the Green Team, which removed the centrifuge entirely, offering the experience without the G-forces. Guests now choose at the entrance. Orange Team spins, Green Team does not. The ride that had been marketed as a revolutionary space simulator had been quietly split in 2, a tacit acknowledgement that the original version carried risks Disney had not fully accounted for. The Orange Team version is still running today. Waiting time is posted higher than the Green Team option, Disney's way of nudging guests toward the more cautious ride. Whether they always make the right choice is another question entirely. Most guests who've ever ridden the Walt Disney World monorail remember it as the most relaxing part of the trip. Austin Wunnenberg loved it. He was 21 years old from Kissimmee, Florida, a young man his coworkers described as unusually dedicated to safety, meticulous about procedure, the kind of driver other operators pointed to when someone asked what a good pilot looked like. He had been flying the monorails at Disney World for over a year. On the morning of July 5, 2009, the height of the 4th of July weekend, Austin was piloting Monorail Purple on the Epcot beam at 2 o'clock in the morning with 6 passengers on board. At the same time, Monorail Pink was attempting a track transition, a switch from the Epcot beam to the Magic Kingdom Express beam. The switch required a shop panel operator to manually align a beam section before the train moved through it. At the precise moment the pink monorail was directed to reverse through switch beam 9, the panel operator was momentarily distracted. A report had come in about a malfunctioning door on a different train, a routine issue that pulled his attention for just a few seconds. Switch beam 9 was never aligned. Monorail Pink began reversing through the unaligned switch onto the same section of track as Monorail Purple. In the final seconds before impact, Austin Wunenberg saw what was coming. NTSB records show that he attempted to throw his train into reverse to try to pull away from the incoming collision. He did not have enough time. The two monorails collided. Austin was cut from the wreckage and pronounced dead at the scene. His 6 passengers were treated for minor injuries and released. He was 21 years old. The NTSB investigation, concluded in October 2011, found no mechanical failures on either train. The cause was human error, combined with a systemic failure. Disney World, at the time of the accident, had no standardized operating procedures for the monorail system. Each crew had developed its own informal practices over years of operation. There was no written rulebook, no backup protocol, no secondary system to catch the error that killed Austin Wunenberg. OSHA proposed fines of $44,000. Disney negotiated them down to $35,200. After the accident, cab riding for guests was discontinued. The beloved tradition of sitting up front with the driver, which Austin had likely grown up doing himself, was quietly ended. A scholarship fund was established in his memory for students pursuing careers in engineering and transportation safety.
Disney World also wrote, for the first time, a standardized operating guide for the monorail system. Austin Wunenberg tried to avert a disaster he didn't cause. That matters. Matt and Melissa Graves had brought their 2 children to Disney World for the kind of trip families plan for months. On the evening of June 14, 2016, they were on the beach at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort, one of the most prestigious hotels on the property, gathered with other guests to watch an outdoor movie screening of Zootopia on the sand beside the Seven Seas Lagoon. The movie was canceled due to weather, but the evening was warm, the beach was calm, and the children were still excited. 2-year-old Lane Thomas Graves, 30 pounds, 37 inches tall, a toddler with a gap-toothed smile his family would describe as his most defining feature, was building sandcastles at the water's edge. He was in ankle-deep water. His father was a few feet away. At approximately 9 p.m., an alligator, estimated at 7 to 8 feet long, emerged from the water and seized Lane Graves by the head. Matt Graves ran into the lagoon. He reached the alligator and put his bare hands into its mouth, physically attempting to pry it open. The alligator thrashed, broke his grip, and pulled Lane beneath the surface. Both disappeared. Lane Thomas Graves' body was found the following morning, 16 hours later, submerged in approximately 6 feet of water not far from where the attack had occurred. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was a traumatic neck injury and drowning. The alligator, investigators concluded, had dropped him as it went deeper, but by then, it was already too late. The investigation uncovered details that are difficult to read. 2 Disney guests had warned Disney employees about an alligator near the beach before the attack took place. The investigation did not determine whether those warnings were acted upon. No swimming signs were posted around the lagoon, but none of them warned of alligators. Disney had removed 83 alligators from resort property in 2016 alone. In the decade prior, more than 220 had been captured and killed. The danger was documented. The signage didn't reflect it. Matt and Melissa Graves released a statement and announced they would not be pursuing a lawsuit against Disney. "We will solely be focused on the future health of our family," they said. They established the Lane Thomas Foundation to support families of children requiring life-saving organ transplants. Disney installed new barriers and replaced all signage around the lagoon to specifically warn guests of alligators and snakes. The Grand Floridian beach where the attack occurred remains open.
Lane Thomas Graves was 2 years old.
Primeval Whirl was not a famous ride. Tucked into the Dinoland USA section of Disney's Animal Kingdom, it was a mid-tier spinner, a cartoon-themed wild mouse coaster where four-person vehicles twisted and spun through a series of flat, tight turns. No one was naming it their favorite Disney attraction. It wasn't the kind of ride anyone wrote home about, but it killed two of Disney's own employees, 4 years apart, on the same ride, after warnings had been issued and ignored. The first was Karen Price. On November 27, 2007, Karen, a 63-year-old ride operator from Carrollton, Ohio, was loading guests onto Primeval Whirl when she leaned over one of the ride vehicles to assist. The vehicle began moving forward automatically. It pushed her 10 feet forward along the loading platform and off the edge, dropping her 3 feet to the ground below. She struck her head on impact. She was taken to the hospital. She died 4 days later from a brain injury. OSHA investigated. They cited Disney for 5 safety violations, including the absence of a handrail that had already been previously flagged in a separate safety review. Disney had been warned the handrail was missing. They hadn't fixed it. The fine was proposed at $21,500. Disney negotiated it to $14,250. The company extended the platform, added floor striping, installed sensor mats designed to automatically shut down the ride if someone stepped into a restricted zone. They made the changes. They said they had learned. On March 13, 2011, 52-year-old attractions mechanic Russell Roscoe was performing scheduled maintenance on Primeval Whirl, wet testing the brake system by spraying water from the lift platform while colleagues inspected the ride below. The gate sensors, designed to alert workers to press an emergency stop if anyone entered a danger zone, had not been maintained on a preventative schedule. They were not functioning reliably. A ride vehicle struck Russell Roscoe in the head. He was airlifted to Orlando Regional Medical Center. He died the following day. OSHA returned. They cited Disney for 4 violations, including a repeat citation, meaning Disney had faced nearly identical safety failures before and had not fully corrected them. The fine was $69,000. 2 workers, same ride, 4 years apart. The warnings were there each time. Primeval Whirl was closed for the remainder of 2011. It reopened, ran for several more years, and quietly closed for the final time in either 2019 or 2020. It was never demolished. It still stands today inside Disney's Animal Kingdom, overgrown, idle, fenced off from the public. There are no signs explaining why. Most guests walk past it without knowing what happened there. 6 accidents. 6 moments when the carefully constructed world of Walt Disney, the happiest place on Earth, came apart. A girl crushed on the 9th day a ride was open. A woman whose seatbelt held a mystery that was never solved. A 4-year-old and a 49-year-old who both fell ill on the same simulator. A pilot who died trying to prevent someone else's mistake. A toddler whose father reached into an alligator's mouth. A mechanic who died on the same ride that had already killed someone 4 years before. Every Disney park you've ever visited, every safety measure you've walked past without thinking about it. The breakaway walls, the sensor mats, the warning signs at the water's edge. Those things exist because of people like Deborah Stone, like Austin Woonenberg, like Karen Price. Their names deserve to be remembered. This is Abandoned Thrills, where every ride tells a story, and some stories never end. When you take a child to an amusement park, you do something most parents don't consciously think about. You trust a system. You trust that the ride was built with your child in mind, that the restraint that locks over their lap was designed to hold someone their size, that the operator checking the seats before launch was actually checking, not just looking for a green light on a panel. That the people who built the ride, and the people who approved it, and the people running it that afternoon all asked the same question before anyone got on. Will this hold them? In the 4 stories in this video, nobody asked that question. Or if they did, they didn't wait for the answer. These are 4 children who met every posted requirement, stood in every line, passed every height marker, and got on rides that couldn't keep them in. What happened next is what the safety system was supposed to prevent. Welcome back to Abandoned Thrills. Make sure to subscribe and comment on which story shocked you the most. Let's dive in. Jason Dansby was 3 years old. His twin brother was 3 years old. They were identical. Born together, raised together in Dalton, a quiet suburb on the south side of Chicago. On the evening of April 2nd, 2011, their parents brought them to Go Bananas, an indoor family entertainment center on North Harlem Avenue in Norridge, the kind of place built specifically for young children. Skee-ball, video games, and a collection of small rides tucked into separate walled sections of the building. The Python Pit was one of those rides. A 5-car children's roller coaster, painted green with a snake figurehead on the front car, looping around a small indoor track. The ride was dark, not pitch dark, but darker than the rest of the building. Part of the track ran behind a wall, out of sight from the operator's position. The ride's maximum height off the ground was 8 feet. Jason and his twin brother got into the front car together. A single lap bar locked across both of them. Their mother was told she didn't need to ride with them. The operator checked the restraints and started the ride. The Python Pit's lap bar had been approved for children meeting the manufacturer's minimum height requirement of 36 inches. Jason was small. Small enough, as the Chicago Tribune's investigation later established, that operators at Python Pit locations in Michigan and Virginia had already increased height requirements for children riding without an adult on the same model. An operator in Kansas had added seatbelts to his ride as a precaution because the lap bar alone concerned him. Illinois hadn't changed anything. On the second lap around the track, Jason got underneath the lap bar. He stood up in the car, facing backward toward the car behind him. Other passengers in that car immediately began screaming for the ride to stop. Multiple patrons throughout the dark room heard the screams and joined in. The operator's position was separated from the track. The building was divided into sections. The screaming continued. The ride completed its second lap past the starting point without stopping. On the third lap, Jason fell between the first and second car. Other passengers leaned out of their seats attempting to reach him. The ride completed its third lap past the starting point without stopping. On the fourth lap, a female employee near the operator's station was seen saying, "Where is the little boy?" The ride completed its fourth lap past the starting point without stopping. On the fourth lap, the roller coaster ran over Jason Dansby. On the fifth and final lap, the roller coaster ran over Jason Dansby again. It came to a stop at the end of its programmed cycle. The Cook County medical examiner ruled Jason's death multiple traumatic injuries, struck by the coaster car, then fallen to the floor below the track, then struck again. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His twin brother had been in the car with him when it started. The Illinois Department of Labor investigated and found no design or maintenance defects with the Python Pit itself. The manufacturer's specifications had been met. Go Bananas' owner and manager were charged not with Jason's death directly, but with record-keeping violations under the Carnival Rides and Amusement Safety Act. Discrepancies in the park's documentation.
The state's own ride inspector, who covered Northeast Illinois and had certified the Python pit in its annual inspection, told the Chicago Tribune afterwards, "I am not looking necessarily whether I think it's a good or bad design. I'm looking for, this is what the manufacturer wanted." In other states, operators who'd looked at that same design had decided the manufacturer's standard wasn't enough and added their own protections. Illinois hadn't required it. Go Bananas hadn't done it voluntarily. After Jason died, the Python pit was still accepting unaccompanied children smaller than him. A state inspector told the Tribune, "This kid should not have died." Jason Dansby was just 3 years old. His identical brother was in the car with him when it started. Truly heartbreaking. Jason fell from a children's ride, a ride designed and marketed specifically for small children. The next story is about a ride that wasn't designed for children at all, and the 11-year-old who was sent to the top of it alone. Pleasant Tech Academy in Pleasantville, New Jersey, took its honor roll students to Maury's Piers as a reward at the end of the school year. Abia Jones was 11 years old. She was the second of 4 children. Her parents would later describe her as a bookworm, already talking about college, already planning a future. The field trip was recognition for something she had worked for. She earned it. The giant wheel at Maury's Mariners Landing Pier is 156 feet tall. Built in 1985 by Dutch manufacturer Vekoma, the same company that built roller coasters for major theme parks across the world, it was one of the largest Ferris wheels on the East Coast. From its highest point, you could see across the entire Jersey Shore. Each gondola was a small enclosed car with a latch-style door, interior railings, and a bench seat. No seatbelt, no lap bar. The ride had operated safely for 26 years. A second child had been assigned to share Abia's gondola. He changed his mind at the last moment and stepped out. Abia boarded alone. The operator closed the door, confirmed the latch, and the giant wheel began to turn. At approximately the 90-degree point of the wheel's rotation, roughly 80 feet up, the gondola paused. The ride had stopped to load new passengers at the ground-level platform. Abia's gondola, gondola number 3, was suspended in the air. Somewhere in the seconds that followed, Abia Jones fell. A security camera captured the moment she began to fall. It did not show how she got out of her seat. There were no other occupied gondolas near hers. There were no witnesses. She fell approximately 100 feet and landed in the boarding area below. Paramedics responded immediately. Blood pooled near the loading platform. Abia was transported to Cape Regional Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead. Her mother, Twanda Jones, received a phone call while riding with a cousin toward Wildwood. She was connected to a school official mid-drive. She asked the one question every parent in that situation asks. Was she alive? No. The New Jersey Department of Community Affairs investigation found no mechanical defects on the gondola. The door had been properly latched, the railings were in sound condition. Whether Abia had stood up, knelt on the seat, or leaned out toward the view, a view her gondola had just reached for the first time in her life, could not be determined. The camera captured the fall, not the cause. What the investigation did establish, the giant wheel had no restraint system that would prevent a child who stood up or leaned forward from going over the railing. The gondolas were designed with the assumption that riders would remain seated. For an adult with a fully developed sense of height and consequence, that assumption was reasonable. For an 11-year-old alone at the top of a 156-foot wheel for the first time, paused in midair, looking out at the ocean, it was a design assumption that had no enforcement mechanism. The park president, Will Morey, told reporters the week after Abaya's death, "They have very mild forces, and we believe that restraints are not necessary to counteract these mild forces." After Abaya's death, New Jersey issued new regulations requiring all Ferris wheel riders to be at least 54 inches tall to ride without a parent or guardian, and recommending a minimum of 2 riders per gondola. Morey's peers went further, raising the minimum unaccompanied height to 60 inches and adopting the 2-person rule. Abaya's lawsuit against Morey's was eventually resolved after years of litigation. The suit alleged that the park had actually planned to install safety restraints on the giant wheel and had not done so. The park denied this. Abaya Jones was on a school trip for making the honor roll. She was 11 years old, just looking at the ocean. 2 children, 2 different parks, 2 different rides, the same failure. A safety system that had no answer for the size of the person it was supposed to protect. What you're about to hear next goes back 4 years earlier to a park where the harness locked, the alarm was silent, and a 12-year-old boy fell anyway. If you've followed Abandoned Thrills from the beginning, you know the summer of 1999. We covered it in our video on the deadliest week in theme park history. 4 incidents in 7 days that exposed a legal gap allowing the amusement park industry to operate outside federal oversight. Joshua Smurfat was one of those 4. But what we didn't tell you then, because it wasn't the story we were telling, is what the investigation actually said about why Joshua fell. Joshua Smurfat was 12 years old. He was visiting Paramount's Great America in Santa Clara, California with friends and family. The drop zone was the park's signature thrill, a 224-foot drop tower that lifted riders to the top, paused, then released them in free fall before catching them magnetically 20 feet above the ground. The ride had been operating since 1996. The harness on the drop zone was an over-the-shoulder restraint, a padded bar that locked down over the rider's chest and torso with a seatbelt as a secondary restraint. The system was designed and calibrated around an average adult frame. For a person of average adult shoulder width, the harness seated across the chest and upper body. The seatbelt buckled across the lap. Joshua met the ride's height requirement. He was allowed on. The restraints were checked and cleared. The ride launched. At the top of the 224-foot tower, Joshua Smurfat's harness was no longer across his chest. His smaller frame, the narrower shoulders, the lighter body weight, the proportions of a 12-year-old rather than a full-grown adult, had allowed the harness to migrate upward during the ascent. By the time the ride released into free fall, the restraint that was supposed to be holding him was no longer in a position to do so. He fell from the top of the drop zone. He survived the initial fall, the free fall portion, because he remained partially in contact with the ride structure. He struck the ground after the ride's deceleration system was no longer in a position to help him. He died at the scene. The California investigation that followed identified the root cause as restraint incompatibility with smaller body types. The harness had been designed to hold the frames it was most commonly attached to. Joshua's frame fell outside that design envelope, and the system had no secondary mechanism to flag that problem before the ride launched. The park's response was to add physical test seats to the boarding area, a replica of the ride's chair mounted at the entrance to the queue, where riders of any size could sit and confirm the harness would engage correctly before waiting in line. You may have seen these at ride entrances and never known why they were there. That's one of the reasons. But the investigation hit a second wall. Because of the roller coaster loophole, the 1981 law that removed federal oversight from fixed-site amusement parks, the Consumer Product Safety Commission had no jurisdiction over the drop zone at Paramount's Great America. They couldn't compel the park to share safety data with other parks operating the same ride. They couldn't require national reporting of the restraint issue. They couldn't enforce the test seat protocol across the industry. Each park made its own decisions. Joshua Smurfat was 12 years old. The harness locked. The alarm was silent. The ride was cleared. He fell from 224 feet. The gap that let him fall was still in the law when we made our last video about 1999. It's still there now. A harness that looked right but wasn't. A system that had no way to know the difference. The last story in this video is about something even simpler. A seatbelt that was already buckled from a previous rider that a 6-year-old girl sat directly on top of. An alarm went off. Someone turned it off, and the ride launched. The haunted mine drop was unlike any other drop tower in the United States. Most drop towers are outdoor rides, open structures rising above theme park midways, riders exposed to the sky, the ground visible below their feet. The haunted mine drop was underground. Built into the side of a mountain at Glenwood Caverns Adventure Park, which sits 7,100 feet above sea level at the top of Glenwood Canyon in Colorado, the ride dropped riders 110 feet straight down through a mine shaft carved into the mountain itself. The darkness was total. The restraint was a simple lap seatbelt, the kind used on commercial aircraft, 2 ends meeting in a center buckle across the rider's lap. On Labor Day weekend, September 5th, 2021, 6-year-old Wangel Estefanos visited Glenwood Caverns with her family from Colorado Springs. Wangel's uncle was with her. He would be in the adjacent seat when the ride launched. What the state investigation reconstructed afterward was a sequence of small failures, each one leading directly to the next. The cycle before Wangel's, one seat had been left empty. When that group of riders finished and unloaded, the operator did not check that all seatbelts had been unbuckled before letting the next group board. Wangel sat down in the seat that had been empty. In the darkness of the mine shaft, with the seatbelt tails already threaded through the buckle from the previous cycle, Wangel, small enough that the belt tails could be pulled completely over her lap, sat on top of the still buckled restraints. She interpreted the belt across her lap as being secured. It was underneath her. The operator walked the row, checking restraints, verifying that buckles appeared properly inserted and pulling tails to confirm tightness. Wangel's belts appeared correctly positioned from the operator's vantage point. They were not. When the operator returned to the control panel, an alarm was active. The system had detected that the seatbelt sensor in Wangel's seat was not registering a proper buckle engagement. The alarm was designed for exactly this situation. The operator had been working at the park for less than 2 weeks. The training they had received on alarm conditions was inadequate, according to the subsequent investigation. The operator interpreted the alarm as indicating a buckle that hadn't been fully engaged, a common nuisance alert from a belt that just needed to be pressed in again. They walked back, visually checked the row, and saw nothing obviously wrong. They returned to the panel and reset the alarm. The ride launched. The haunted mine drop fell 110 feet in under 3 seconds. At the bottom of the shaft, the ride decelerated to a stop. Wangel's uncle turned to see if she had enjoyed it. She wasn't in her seat. Wangel Estefanos had fallen 110 feet inside a mine shaft in complete darkness. She was 6 years old. The Colorado State investigation cited multiple operator errors and inadequate training. No criminal charges were filed. The district attorney's office said they could not prove criminal negligence beyond a reasonable doubt. Wongel's family filed suit in October 2021. The case went to trial in September 2025. Over 3 weeks of testimony, the jury heard that the ride's manufacturer, Soaring Eagle Inc., had been aware of 2 prior ejections from the same restraint design and had not disclosed this information publicly. They heard that customers had previously complained to the park about operators not properly securing passengers on the haunted mine drop. They heard that the park's training program had been rated inadequate by the state's own investigation. On September 19, 2025, the jury awarded Wongel's family $205 million, the second largest wrongful death award for a single plaintiff in Colorado state history. $123 million of that was punitive damages, a specific signal from the jury that the conduct they had heard about was not a mistake. It was a choice. The award was later reduced to $116 million. In February 2026, just weeks before this video was released, Glenwood Caverns Adventure Park filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, citing the verdict as posing an existential threat to the business. A separate Colorado court ruled that Wongel's death constituted a felonious killing under state law. The haunted mine drop was permanently closed after the accident. In 2023, the park replaced it with a redesigned ride under a new name, the Crystal Tower. The mine shaft where Wongel Estefanos fell is still there under the mountain. She was 6 years old and suffered a fate that could bring you to tears. 4 children, 4 different rides, 4 different parks across 3 decades. A 3-year-old whose body slipped under a bar calibrated for someone twice his size. An 11-year-old alone at the top of a 156-foot wheel with nothing between her and the air. A 12-year-old whose harness locked across his shoulders and migrated upward during a 224-foot ascent. A 6-year-old who sat on top of a seatbelt in the dark while an alarm went off and was reset. Every one of them met the requirements. Every one of them was cleared to ride. Every one of them had an operator who completed the pre-launch check. The system said, "Go." The question every one of these cases eventually forced someone to ask, in a courtroom, in a state investigation report, in a new regulation, is the question that should have been asked before the ride launched. Did we build this for everyone who's going to get on it? In most of these cases, the answer was no. In most of these cases, no one had asked. Thanks for watching Abandoned Thrills. Subscribe and comment down below what stories we should cover next. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one. The summer of 1999 was the most thrill-obsessed summer America had ever seen. Roller coasters were getting taller, faster, and louder every single year. The industry was worth $9 billion. 309 million people walked through the gates of American amusement parks that summer alone. Parks were locked in an arms race, each one building higher, dropping further, spinning harder than the last. And the public couldn't get enough. Roller coasters were on the front pages of newspapers, the covers of magazines, the lead stories on local news every time a new record was broken. Nobody was asking whether any of this was regulated. Almost no one knew the answer. It wasn't. Not really. Not the rides that mattered most. And in 6 days at the end of that summer, 6 days between August 22nd and August 28th, 1999, 5 people died on American amusement park rides. A 12-year-old boy, a 20-year-old man, a 16-year-old worker, a mother, and her 8-year-old daughter. 5 deaths, 4 parks, 4 different states, 6 days. The week that made America look at the rides it had always trusted and finally ask the question nobody in the industry wanted answered. Welcome to Abandoned Thrills. Before we get to the week itself, you need to understand something. Something the amusement park industry spent decades and millions of dollars making sure you didn't know. In 1972, the Federal Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC, was given authority over every consumer product that posed a risk to the public. That included amusement rides. A family at a theme park had the same federal protections as a family buying a baby crib or a bicycle. If a ride failed, the CPSC could investigate. It could compel parks to share information, identify systemic flaws, and force nationwide fixes. Then, the industry lobbied. In 1981, after intensive pressure from the owners of large fixed-site parks, Congress quietly amended the Consumer Product Safety Act. A small piece of language was inserted. The phrase, "permanently fixed to a site," was carved out of federal oversight. Overnight, every ride that stayed in one park, every roller coaster, every drop tower, every spinning attraction at every major theme park in the country was removed from CPSC jurisdiction. Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts would later call it the roller coaster loophole, and he would spend the next 2 decades of his career trying to close it. This is what it meant in practice. When something went wrong on a theme park ride, no federal agency had the legal authority to investigate. Parks weren't required to report injuries. A fatal flaw on a ride in Virginia could kill someone on Monday, and the park operating the same model in California would have no obligation to be told. The CPSC could inspect a carnival ride that traveled by truck. It could not set foot inside a Six Flags. The loophole had been in place for 18 years by the summer of 1999. And then came August. Tammy Smurfhat had saved up for this trip. She was a single mother, and her 12-year-old son Joshua had been asking about Paramount's Great America for months. Paramount's had everything. Roller coasters, themed areas, all the noise and color and controlled chaos that a kid could want. And Joshua loved it there. He had been multiple times. He had a favorite ride, the Drop Zone Stunt Tower, a towering 224-foot structure where riders were lifted to the top in open-air seats, feet dangling over the park below, and then dropped in free fall at 62 miles per hour before the magnetic brakes brought them to a stop. He had ridden it dozens of times. On August 22, 1999, at 3:20 in the afternoon, Joshua rode it one more time. Tammy was 5 feet away. She was watching. What she witnessed in the seconds that followed would stay with her for the rest of her life and would become the first death of the deadliest week in American theme park history. Somehow, during the descent, Joshua slipped out of his shoulder harness. He fell from the ride. Investigators would later confirm that the harness itself, when examined, was still in its locked position. He had slipped through it. A 12-year-old boy with both mental and physical disabilities that the park described as significant, on a ride that subjected him to 62 miles per hour of gravitational force in an open seat with nothing but a shoulder bar between him and the sky. Joshua Smurfhat was pronounced dead that afternoon. There was a detail buried in the investigation that is hard to sit with. Moments before Joshua's group boarded, the ride's computer had displayed an error message. A separate car on the same ride had been taken out of service. The entire tower was scheduled to be shut down for the rest of the day. but not before one final group of riders, including Joshua, had their turn. The Santa Clara County District Attorney reviewed the case and found no grounds for criminal charges. The manufacturer, Intamin of Zurich, inspected the ride and found no mechanical failures. In the months that followed, Paramount's Great America installed a secondary safety strap on every seat, a short belt connecting the shoulder harness to the seat itself, designed to catch any rider who might slip. The thing that could have kept Joshua alive was now standard equipment. It had taken a 12-year-old boy's death to get it there. His sister Alicia remembered him as someone who loved the park, who had ridden the drop zone more times than she could count, who had never once been anything other than safe in that seat. His mother Tammy stood 5 feet away. She watched, and no federal agency was permitted to set foot on the scene to investigate why. The following evening, less than 30 hours after Joshua Smurfett died in California, a 20-year-old man died in Virginia. His name was not publicly released, in keeping with his family's wishes. He was riding the Shockwave, a stand-up roller coaster at Paramount's Kings Dominion Park in Doswell, Virginia. The Shockwave was a 95-foot coaster reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour. Stand-up coasters are exactly what they sound like. Riders are locked in, not in a seated position, but standing upright, their legs hanging free, secured at the chest by a shoulder harness with a leg brace beneath. At some point during the ride, the 20-year-old came free. He fell. He was killed. And then, the Shockwave continued its circuit back to the station. When investigators examined the restraints on his seat, they found them locked, in perfect working order. The shoulder harness was still secured. The leg brace was still in position. The restraints had not failed. The ride had not failed. There was no mechanical fault that anyone could document. How a man comes free of a locked, functioning restraint system at speed on a 95-foot coaster and is never seen to have tampered with it is a question the investigation ultimately left unanswered. Park officials publicly attributed the accident to rider misconduct, that the man had deliberately or accidentally manipulated his own restraints while the coaster was in motion. But no investigation ever confirmed this conclusively. No lawsuit was ever filed. No charges were ever brought. The Shockwave was reopened after inspectors certified the ride was mechanically sound. The man's name was never released. He was 20 years old. He was at an amusement park in August. No federal agency was permitted to investigate. The same day the man died on the Shockwave in Virginia, a 16-year-old named Matthew Henney was working his shift at Lake Compounce in Bristol, Connecticut. Lake Compounce is the oldest continuously operating amusement park in the United States, founded in 1846, a historical oddity that the park still uses in its marketing today. In 1996, it had been purchased by Pittsburgh-based Kennywood Entertainment for a multi-million-dollar restoration. It had new rides, new investment, a new future. One of those new rides was the Tornado, a scrambler-style indoor attraction that moved riders through a star-shaped pattern in near-total darkness, surrounded by strobe lights and music that could be felt more than heard. Matthew's job as ride attendant was to make sure guests were secured before the Tornado started. He was 16 years old, working a summer job at a park he'd likely grown up visiting. On August 23rd, at approximately 5 in the afternoon, Matthew was in the loading zone when something went wrong. He fell beneath the ride. The Tornado came down on him. Firefighters arrived and used inflatable airbags to lift the massive structure approximately 1.5 inches off the ground, just enough to pull him free. He was airlifted to Hartford Hospital with 2 broken arms, dislocated shoulders, internal injuries, and a serious head wound. He was alert during the rescue. He spoke to the paramedics. Matthew Henney died from his injuries. OSHA investigated. They fined Lake Compounce $7,000. $7,000. In the years that followed, Lake Compounce would claim repeatedly that safety was their highest priority. In June 2001, a 23-year-old maintenance worker named Wilfredo Martinez was struck and killed while trimming weeds beneath the Boulder Dash roller coaster during a test run. The lockout device that would have prevented the coaster from operating while a worker was beneath it was not in use, a violation of federal OSHA regulations. It was the third death at the park in 22 months. Matthew Henney was 16 years old. He was working a summer job. He was alert when they pulled him out from under the ride. 6 days after Joshua Smurfat died in California, the week claimed 2 more lives. Kimberly Bailey was 39 years old, from Pomona, New York. She had brought her children to the boardwalk at Ocean City, New Jersey, the kind of summer evening that exists for families. Bright lights and salt air and the sound of rides over the water. The boardwalk was packed. One of the longest lines that Saturday evening was at a new ride on Jillian's Wonderland Pier, the Wild Wonder roller coaster, a Zamperla-built Wild Mouse design, 35 feet high, 885 feet of track, opened to the public just 58 days earlier on July 1st. The Wild Wonder had been inspected by the state of New Jersey on July 1st and again on July 21st. Both times, it had passed. New Jersey Governor Christine Whitman had personally attended the grand opening. Kimberly brought her daughters to the ride. Her youngest, who was 5 years old, tried to get in the car with her mother and her 8-year-old sister, Jessica. She was turned away. She was too short. The height requirement for the Wild Wonder was firm, and it kept the 5-year-old on the ground while her mother and sister climbed into the car at approximately 10 o'clock on the night of August 28th. The car began its ascent up the first 40-foot incline. Then, 2 things failed at once. The drag chain, the mechanism designed to pull the car to the peak before detaching for the descent, snapped. And the anti-rollback device, the secondary system installed precisely to prevent a car from rolling backward if the chain failed, did not engage. The car reversed direction. It rolled backward down the 30-foot incline, gaining speed. At the bottom, it hit the 90-degree curve in the track at full reverse velocity. Kimberly Bailey and her daughter Jessica were ejected. They were taken by paramedics to Shore Memorial Hospital, 5 minutes from the pier. Both were pronounced dead on arrival. The 5-year-old watched from the ground. John Bailey, Kimberly's husband, the girl's father, filed a lawsuit the following year seeking $275 million. He alleged the park had known the coaster was defective prior to opening. New Jersey's Division of Codes and Standards fined Jillian's Wonderland Pier $25,000 for safety violations. And the state legislature, responding to the deaths, raised the maximum fine for a theme park safety violation in New Jersey from $500 to $5,000. The Wild Wonder was removed the following season. The pier continued operating for years afterward, and at the federal level, where a national agency could have looked at the Wild Wonder, the drop zone, the shockwave, and the tornado simultaneously, could have searched for patterns, could have issued warnings to every park operating similar rides, nothing happened. Because nothing was allowed to happen. In the weeks after August 1999, U.S. News and World Report called it one of the most calamitous weeks in the history of American amusement parks. Congressman Ed Markey stood before the House of Representatives and named Joshua, the shockwave victim, Kimberly, and Jessica by incident. He introduced the National Amusement Park Ride Safety Act, citing the week as proof that the roller coaster loophole had to be closed. that a federal agency needed the authority to investigate these deaths, share findings nationally, and prevent the same flaw from killing someone on a different ride in a different state. The bill was defeated. He reintroduced it the following Congress, and the Congress after that, and the one after that, every 2 years for more than 2 decades, as children and adults continued to die on amusement park rides across America. Every time, the industry, represented by the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, which spent approximately $600,000 a year lobbying against federal oversight, had the bill killed. As of today, the roller coaster loophole still exists in modified form. The CPSC still has limited authority over fixed-site rides. There is still no national database that requires parks to report deaths and serious injuries. A ride that kills someone in New Jersey is not legally required to trigger an inspection of the same model in California. Paramount's Great America added a safety strap to the drop zone after Joshua Smurfat died. New Jersey raised its maximum fine from $500 to $5,000. Matthew Henny's death cost Lake Compounce $7,000. 5 people died in 6 days in August 1999. The industry told the press it was a coincidence, a set of unrelated accidents, nothing systemic, no pattern to investigate. The pattern was the loophole itself. Kimberly Bailey's 5-year-old daughter was too short to get in the car. She stood on the boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey, and watched. The memory of that night belongs to her now. It belongs to Joshua Smurfat's mother, who was standing 5 feet away. It belongs to Matthew Henny's family, who lost him on a summer shift at the oldest park in the country. This is Abandoned Thrills, where every ride tells a story. And some stories, the industry hoped you'd never hear. There is a phrase that has become a cultural shorthand in Britain: health and safety. Said with a particular tone, one part mockery, one part exhaustion. Warning signs on straightforward objects. Rules that seem to assume the public cannot be trusted to walk across a car park without injuring themselves. Health and safety, a bureaucratic joke. What almost nobody discusses is where that framework came from. Not from cautious planners sitting in rooms imagining hypothetical dangers. It came from specific incidents, specific rides, specific parks, specific dates, where people were killed or permanently injured because the rules either didn't exist yet or weren't followed, or existed on paper and still weren't enough to save anyone. The Health and Safety at Work Act became law in 1974. The stories that made it necessary predate it. And the stories that proved it still wasn't sufficient came after it. These are 5 of them. 5 incidents at British theme parks and fun fairs spanning 5 decades. From a summer afternoon in London in 1972, when a children's roller coaster ran backwards, and nothing in British law required anyone to answer for it. To a school trip in Staffordshire in 2017, when every warning had been given, every procedure was in place, and a child still drowned in a ride that had been specifically flagged as dangerous. In every case, the gap between the known problem and the enforced solution is where the story lives. This is Abandoned Thrills. Like, subscribe, and comment down below where you're watching from. Let's begin. May 30th, 1972. Battersea Park, London. Half term. Schools had broken up for the week, which meant the fun fair in Battersea Park was packed. The Big Dipper, a wooden roller coaster that had been operating since 1951, the signature attraction of what many historians now call Britain's first true theme park, was drawing its usual long queues. It was, in the words of survivors, the London Eye of its day. The Duchess of Kent had ridden it on opening day. The Bolshoi Ballet had climbed aboard in 1965. By 1972, the Big Dipper was nearly 50 years old. Its replacement parts had been sourced secondhand from other fairgrounds after a fire damaged the ride 2 years earlier. One of those replacement trains had come from Dreamland in Margate. Hilary Winter was 13 years old. She was there with her cousin. They linked arms before the ascent. "For some reason we don't understand," she would say decades later. They never reached the top. The Big Dipper's safety architecture, by 1972, was a series of accumulating failures. A 50-point safety report had been compiled following the 1970 fire. It was disregarded. The haul rope that pulled trains to the top was fraying. 7 of the 8 safety arresters, the devices designed to stop a runaway train, were not functioning. Managers had been drinking. Teenage staff were operating rides without proper training. There had been a prior incident the previous year. A train had run backwards on the same ride, injuring a passenger. The dog brake had not operated. The report was filed. The ride kept running. In British law in 1972, there was no statutory requirement for an engineering inspection of the Big Dipper. The Showman's Guild had a voluntary code of practice. Compliance was at the discretion of the owner. At some point during the afternoon run on May 30th, the haul rope broke. The emergency brake failed to engage. The train rolled backwards down the track and picked up speed. The brakeman struggled to slow it. He could not. At the bottom curve, the rear carriage left the rails. It crashed through a barrier. The 2 carriages behind it piled on top. 2 teenagers were killed at the scene. An 8-year-old boy died at the scene. 2 more children died from their injuries in the days that followed. 13 others were injured. One survivor fell through a rotted wooden handrail on the emergency walkway, the walkway that was supposed to allow people to escape, and fell to the ground below. Hilary Winter spent nearly a month in hospital before being transferred to rehabilitation to learn to walk again. The investigation revealed 66 faults on the Big Dipper. Not 6, 66. Worn brakes, misaligned track, rotten structural wood, a haul rope that should have been replaced, safety arresters that had never been properly maintained. Post-mortem findings identified the cause of each child's death. Witnesses described what they saw walking away from the wreckage. Carolyn Adamczyk, a teenager on the ride that afternoon, told The Independent 4 decades later, "I realized as I was walking down that I was walking on blood." The ride manager, James Hogan, and the inspecting engineer, Frank Etches, were committed for trial. The trial at the Old Bailey in November 1973 heard the full extent of what the Big Dipper had been. The prosecution described it as a death trap. Witnesses testified that managers were often drunk, that employees used drugs on the job, that a similar runaway had occurred the previous year without prompting significant action. On November 20th, 1973, both defendants were acquitted. No one was convicted of any offense in connection with the deaths of 5 children. The Big Dipper was dismantled. The fun fair itself, stripped of its signature attraction, declined in attendance and closed in September 1974. What the Battersea disaster did produce, eventually, was regulatory movement. The Home Secretary commissioned a review within weeks of the accident. The Health and Safety at Work Act passed in 1974. British fairgrounds were gradually brought within its scope. The 1972 disaster is described by historians as the catalyst. The law it helped create has been cited in every prosecution in this video. Hillary Winter said in 2022, on the 50th anniversary, that she went back to Battersea Park looking for a memorial. "I poked around and found nothing," she said. There were signs explaining that a fun fair had once operated there, nothing marking what had happened. A cherry tree was planted in May 2022, 50 years after the fact. 5 children died on a sunny May afternoon in London because nothing required the ride they were on to be safe. The law that changed that came 2 years later. The next story takes place 30 years after that law was passed. The ride had been inspected, the rules were in place, and a 16-year-old girl from Pontypool still didn't come home. April 15th, 2004. Oakwood Theme Park, Narberth, Pembrokeshire. Hayley Williams was 16 years old. She was a Sunday school teacher from Pontypool, Torvine, a detail her family chose to share in the days after her death because it said something about who she was. She'd been brought to Oakwood as a treat with her younger sister and her parents. It was the kind of day families drive across South Wales for. Oakwood's Hydro ride had opened 2 years earlier. Standing at 121 feet, Europe's fastest and wettest water coaster at the time, it was the park's flagship attraction. Riders were secured in seats with over-the-shoulder harnesses for the descent. Except in 2004, they were using lap bars. The Hydro used a lap bar and seatbelt restraint system when it opened. Intamin, the manufacturer, had already seen a near-identical problem on a similar ride in the United States, at Knott's Berry Farm's Perilous Plunge in California, where a woman had fallen to her death in September 2001 when the lap bar failed to adequately retain her. Perilous Plunge had been modified following that incident. The modification never reached Oakwood. What the subsequent investigation would also reveal was not a single day's lapse on April 15th. CCTV footage reviewed by investigators showed that operators at the Hydro had been routinely not checking that passenger restraints were secured before dispatching the ride. This was not an aberration. It was, the footage demonstrated, standard practice. At some point during the descent, Hayley Williams was ejected from her seat. She fell approximately 100 feet. A 10-year-old boy named Martin Rothwell was struck as she fell and was hospitalized with head injuries. Hayley Williams was airlifted to hospital. She died of internal injuries. Dyfed Powys Police launched an investigation immediately. The Hydro was closed for the remainder of the 2004 season. The park issued statements expressing cooperation with investigators. Hayley's parents were informed. Her father and mother had been at the park with her. A spokesperson confirmed the park's position. They had cooperated fully and believed the outcome would reflect this. A 21-month investigation followed. The coroner's inquest in May 2006 returned a narrative verdict. Hayley had not been properly restrained. Unlawful killing was ruled out. No criminal prosecution was brought, but the health and safety executive continued its separate inquiry. What it found confirmed what the CCTV had shown. Not a single check that had failed, but a culture of checks that weren't happening at all. Restraint verification on the Hydro was not being performed systematically. The ride was being dispatched with restraints in uncertain states, repeatedly over time. In December 2008, 4.5 years after Hayley Williams died, Oakwood Leisure Limited pleaded guilty at Swansea Crown Court to breaching Section 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Judge Justice Lloyd Jones noted that the safety failures had created, in his words, the potential for really serious injury to very large numbers of people. Oakwood was fined £250,000 and ordered to pay £80,000 in costs. The hydro was reopened in 2005 with over-the-shoulder harnesses. It was renamed Drenched in 2011. It operated until February 2025, when cranes arrived to dismantle it. Haley Williams was 16 years old and a Sunday school teacher from Pontypool. Her family had brought her to Oakwood as a treat. The CCTV footage that documented what was happening on the hydro before she died did not show a single moment of failure. It showed a pattern, a routine, systematic practice of not checking that had been operating for some time before she arrived. The law existed. The inspection framework existed. No one had looked at what the cameras were showing. 12 years later, in a theme park in Scotland, a roller coaster full of children would come off its rails entirely. If you're watching this on your television right now, the Abandoned Thrills channel covers theme park accidents, the investigations that followed, and the consequences that came after. You can find every documentary we've made on YouTube. Search Abandoned Thrills. June 26, 2016. Strathclyde Country Park, Motherwell, North Lanarkshire. A Sunday afternoon. M&D's Scotland's theme park, a family park on the edge of Strathclyde Loch, was running at full capacity. The Tsunami roller coaster, an inverted steel coaster where riders hung in gondolas below the track, was the park's most intense thrill ride. It ran at speeds of up to 40 miles per hour through corkscrew turns and loops. It was the only inverted roller coaster in Scotland. Among the riders that afternoon were at least 9 children. The Tsunami had been manufactured by Italian company Pinfari. Before arriving at M&D's in 2004, it had traveled with carnival tours through South America, Argentina, Peru, Nicaragua. Second-hand rides of documented histories that are only as reliable as the documentation provided with them. In 2016, repairs had been carried out on the Tsunami's trains. The subsequent investigation would identify the cause of what happened next. The repairs had been performed using a welding metal that was incompatible with the coaster's original materials. Incompatible welding introduces stress points. Stress points, under the repeated forces of operation, propagate. The daily visual checks that operators conducted could not have detected an internal metallurgical failure. Nobody had opened the welds to look. The ride had also previously been the subject of 2 separate incidents. In July 2011, 9 passengers had been stranded on it for 8 hours when it halted 60 feet above the ground. In March 2016, 8 people had to be rescued from the Tornado coaster when it stopped 20 feet off the ground. The park had a pattern of ride failures that were handled one by one without triggering a broader structural audit. At approximately 3:40 p.m. on June 26th, all 5 gondolas of the Tsunami's yellow train detached from the rails at a bend near the bottom of the first drop. Witness Rosalind Roger was watching from nearby. "I just turned around and you seen it. Not in slow motion, but in fast motion. Just plunged down to the ground," she said. "And you heard the crash. You heard the screaming and the fear of people." The train fell approximately 20 feet. The gondolas landed upside down and on their sides on a concrete path on top of a children's car ride area. Children were still in their seats, suspended upside down by their harnesses, trapped in the wreckage. 6 ambulances, a specialist operation team, and emergency doctors arrived at the park. Bystanders, including parents who had been watching from the queue, rushed in to help free trapped children. Images posted to social media showed legs protruding from overturned gondolas. 2 young boys were taken to hospital in critical condition. Police Scotland declared the park closed. Witness James Millerick had been queuing nearby and had seen the carriage crash. There were maybe 7 or 8 individuals, mostly of younger age, between 10 and 15 years old, he told Sky News, that were actually trapped inside the roller coaster, lying on the ground. The harnesses were still on, so there was absolutely no movement. 10 people were hospitalized in total, 8 children and 2 adults. The HSE investigation took nearly 3 years. In March 2019, M&D's Scotland's theme park pleaded guilty to breaching the Health and Safety at Work Act. The specific finding? Repairs had been carried out using an incompatible welding metal, introducing structural weakness that resulted in the gondola assembly failing in operation. The park was fined £65,000. The Tsunami was never reopened. It was removed and sold. The park itself announced its permanent closure in 2022. The repairs that caused the derailment had been carried out by someone with access to the maintenance systems of the only inverted roller coaster in Scotland. The HSE found no evidence that anyone had formally assessed whether the welding materials being used met the manufacturer's specifications. Children who came to a Scottish theme park on a Sunday afternoon in June 2016 ended the day suspended upside down in wreckage on a concrete path, waiting for firefighters to free them. The investigation found what the investigation always finds in these cases: not malice, not recklessness in the ordinary sense. A repair carried out with the wrong material by someone who did not know it was wrong on a ride nobody had fully audited for years. The wrong weld, the wrong metal. The right result from the standpoint of physics was inevitable. The following year, 11 months later, at a theme park in Staffordshire, a different kind of failure would happen, one in which the warning had been given in writing. 27 days before a child died. May 9th, 2017. Drayton Manor Theme Park, Tamworth, Staffordshire. Eva Janeth was 11 years old. She was a pupil at Jamia Girls Academy in Leicester, and this was an end-of-year school trip, the kind of day that gets anticipated for weeks. She had come with her friends and her teachers. The weather was fine. The park was busy. Splash Canyon was a river rapids ride. Open since 1993, it used 6-person boats sent along a circulating water channel, the current pushing them through a route of bumpers and turning points. 21 boats, thousands of rides a day in summer, millions of rides since it opened. Eva climbed into the boat with 4 of her friends. In the weeks before May 9th, 2017, staff at Drayton Manor had raised specific concerns about Splash Canyon with park management. The concerns were formal and documented. A safety meeting held 27 days before Eva Janeth's death identified 3 specific issues on the ride: inadequate safety signage telling passengers to stay seated, CCTV coverage that only extended to 50% of the ride's route, and a new sprinkler system that had been installed at the channel's edge, which sprayed passengers with water and was encouraging riders to stand up to avoid it. All 3 issues were raised by staff. Nothing was done in the 27 days between that meeting and May 9th. The court would later hear that in those 27 days, 70 people had stood up in the boats on the ride. On a typical journey, between 9% and 16% of boats experienced some form of passenger misbehavior: standing, reaching, leaning. This was known. The loudspeaker system existed to instruct passengers to sit down. It was never used. Eva Janeth stood up in the boat mid-ride. The boat struck a bumper and she was propelled into the water. No staff member saw her fall in. The CCTV system, covering only half the course, did not capture the moment. The alarm that should have alerted operators to a person in the water was not working. Eva could not swim. She waded through the shallower water and reached the ride's conveyor belt,
a travelator that moved boats along the return section of the track. The travelator was covered in algae. She slipped. She fell into a section of deeper water. It was 18 minutes before staff reached her. She was airlifted to Birmingham Children's Hospital and pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The cause was drowning. Emergency services responded once the alarm was raised. The park was closed. Eva's family in Leicester was informed. Her family said their world had been torn apart. Her community in Leicester, where hundreds gathered at her funeral, described a child whose warmth was felt by everyone around her. The Health and Safety Executive began its investigation. Staffordshire Police also investigated the possibility of criminal charges. The police investigation concluded that the evidence did not meet the threshold for corporate manslaughter or gross negligence. The file was passed to the HSE. The HSE's findings identified 5 specific failures: inadequate signage, insufficient CCTV, the sprinkler system that encouraged passengers to stand, a malfunctioning alarm, and the park's failure to respond to the documented safety concerns raised 27 days before. HSE Principal Inspector Lynn Spooner said, "The risks from ejection from the raft had been evident to Drayton Manor for some time, yet they still failed to take the action that could have prevented Eva's death. This tragic event should never have happened." On March 18, 2021, at Stafford Crown Court, Drayton Manor Theme Parks Limited pleaded guilty to breaching Section 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Judge Mr. Justice Spencer described the incident as an utterly tragic waste of a young life. The fine was £1 million. The fine was never paid. In the period between the HSE prosecution and the sentencing, Drayton Manor had entered administration and been sold to new owners, the Looping Group, a European leisure company. Because the new owners had purchased the park itself, not the insolvent company, the £1 million liability did not transfer. The fine existed on paper. Nobody paid it. The Splash Canyon ride was permanently closed. It has never reopened. Eva Janeth's school trip ended in her death in a theme park that had been warned, in writing, by its own staff 27 days before she arrived about the exact conditions that killed her. The fine imposed was the largest ever for a UK theme park HSE prosecution at the time. It was never collected. Stories like Eva's deserve to be remembered, and if you believe that, Abandoned Thrills documents them every week. June 2nd, 2015. Alton Towers, Staffordshire. Leah Washington was 17 years old. Joe Pugh was 18. They were on a first date. They had arrived at Alton Towers together and made immediately for the Smiler, the flagship roller coaster of the park's X Sector area, which held the Guinness World Record for most inversions on any roller coaster in the world. 14 loops in a single ride. Opened in 2013 at a cost of £18 million, the ride had experienced technical issues that morning and been temporarily closed. By early afternoon, it had reopened. Leah and Joe joined the queue. At 2:09 in the afternoon, they boarded a carriage and took the front seats. In the hour before the crash, a sequence of events had unfolded in the Smiler's operating system that the park's safety procedures did not adequately account for. A test carriage had been sent around the track and stalled midway, triggered, staff believed, by a gust of wind. The ride's computerized block system did the correct thing. It detected the stationary carriage and halted the ride. Safety systems performing as designed. An engineer on duty believed the system alert to be a false alarm. He felt, the court would later hear, pressure to return the Smiler to service. Visitors had been waiting. The ride had already been closed once that day. The engineer manually overrode the block system. He had not received the Smiler's instruction manual.
It had not been provided to engineering staff. The manual explicitly stated the ride should not operate in winds exceeding 34 miles per hour. Wind speed at the time of the accident was 45 miles per hour. The manual also contained protocols for resolving block system alerts during live operation. Without the manual, those protocols did not exist in the engineer's decision-making. He overrode the system and dispatched the carriage carrying Leah Washington, Joe Pugh, and 14 other passengers toward a stationary train already on the track ahead. The impact, prosecutors would later tell the court, was equivalent to driving into a car at 90 miles per hour. Leah Washington's legs were crushed against the metal of the carriage in front. Joe Pugh's kneecaps were shattered. Multiple fingers on one hand were severed. 3 other passengers suffered injuries requiring immediate surgery: broken bones, punctured lungs, severe abdominal trauma. 16 people were on the carriage. 11 suffered injuries. 5 required urgent medical intervention. Rescue crews spent 4.5 hours cutting the most seriously injured passengers free from the wreckage, suspended 7 meters above the ground. 25 firefighters worked the recovery. Leah Washington was in intensive care for 5 days. She was in hospital for 8 weeks. Her left leg was amputated above the knee. Vicky Balch, 19, another front row passenger, underwent a through-knee amputation. Joe Pugh required extensive reconstructive surgery on both knees. The park was closed. Merlin Entertainments, which owns Alton Towers, accepted responsibility immediately. The closure of Alton Towers was costing the company an estimated £500,000 per day. Joe Pugh's father called the scene a horror movie. Leah's father described her injuries as life-changing. For both of them, it was also a first date. They had met each other that morning. The HSE investigation concluded that the accident was entirely avoidable. It found no fault with the Smiler's track, its carriages, or its computerized safety system. The system had worked correctly. The root cause, as Judge Michael Chambers, QC, stated in his sentencing remarks, was an absence of a structured and considered system, not the failure of an individual making a mistake within a sound framework, but the absence of the framework itself. Engineers had not been given the ride's operating manual. There was no written protocol for managing block system alerts during live operation. There was no process that would have stopped the override from happening. The engineer had not acted maliciously or recklessly in the ordinary sense. He had done his best within a system that didn't give him what he needed. Merlin Attractions Operations Limited pleaded guilty on April 22, 2016. On September 27, 2016, Judge Chambers imposed a fine of £5 million, the largest ever levied against a UK theme park for a safety breach, reduced from £7.5 million in recognition of the guilty plea. Vicky Balch and Leah Washington later sued Merlin separately for negligence. Compensation of approximately £2 million each was projected. Leah Washington and Joe Pugh were married in 2024, 9 years after the crash that put them both in hospital on their first date. They are, in their own words, really happy. They hosted a charity ball to support the Yorkshire Air Ambulance and the Limbo Foundation. Leah said, "You've always got to find the positive in the negative and just got to grab life because it's so precious." The Smiler was reopened in March 2016, 9 months after 2 teenagers lost their legs on it. It has run continuously since. The instruction manual that the engineer never received, the one that contained the protocols for the situation he was placed in, is now provided to all staff who work the ride.
5 rides, 5 decades, 5 investigations by the Health and Safety Executive, or its predecessors. Battersea, 1972. A report showing 66 faults on a ride that had killed 5 children and 2 defendants acquitted in a system that didn't yet have the tools to hold anyone accountable. Oakwood, 2004. A CCTV record of systematic restraint failures at a ride where a 16-year-old fell 100 feet. M&D's, 2016. A weld made from the wrong metal on the only inverted roller coaster in Scotland, carrying a train full of children. Drayton Manor, 2017. A documented warning, a documented meeting, 27 days of inaction, and a fine that was never paid because the company folded before it could be collected. Alton Towers, 2015. A safety system that worked correctly and was manually overridden by an engineer working without the manual he should have been given. The Health and Safety at Work Act was passed in 1974. Every prosecution in this video took place under its provisions. It was built partly on the ground where those 5 children died in Battersea Park. It is one of the strongest workplace safety frameworks in the world. It is enforced by one of the most respected regulatory bodies in the world. And in every story you've just heard, the gap between the documented risk and the enforced action is where someone was killed or permanently injured. The Smiler is still open. It still holds the world record for most inversions on a roller coaster. The £5 million fine imposed on Merlin Entertainments remains the largest ever levied on a UK theme park. Both records stand today. Britain built the rule book. These are the stories that made it necessary, and the stories that prove that building the rule book was never quite enough. Welcome to Abandoned Thrills, where we document the accidents that changed everything. Subscribe to make sure you never miss the next one.